Chapter 1280. The First Year of Xiangfu. Early winter. Near the city of Liangzhou, a delicate and pretty girl in thin clothes and a young monk in a shabby kasaya were walking together. Stupid Nanbei, we're almost at Liangzhou. Why am I getting more and more nervous? It's almost as nervous as the first time I peeked at the love letter that the vixen at the foot of the mountain wrote to my father. You're nervous when you're close to home. Anyway, Su Fengyan's home is half your home. A monk is pleading for you. Aren't you afraid that the Buddha living in the Western paradise will drown you with a sneeze? Master still has his wife. I don't see him being afraid of wind, rain, or thunder. Stupid Nanbei, we don't even have a copper coin to buy beautiful rouge and face powder this time. Will he think that I'm getting uglier and uglier? How can he? This is your promise. If it's not like this when the time comes, I'll beat you up. Ba, stupid Nanbei, let me ask you a question. You Buddhists, stop. Li Zi, your home is my home. What do you mean, you Buddhists? I was picked up by Master and brought up the mountain. It was Master's wife who helped me shave my hair. Master's wife said that I was crying at that time. Look, how old was I at that time? I already knew that I didn't want to be a monk. Okay. Just answer me directly. Why do Buddhists say that the heart is all prajna? Then, are those bodhisattvas' great wishes a kind of obsession? If so, how can there be hope to become a Buddha? Li Zi, why don't I answer you after I become a Buddha and burn the saraira? Is this how you used to preach to those big and small baldies? No wonder the old abbot always likes to owe copper coins. Mother asked me to urge him, but the old abbot always laughed bitterly as if he had eaten something bad. It must be that the old abbot dislikes your preaching. Stupid Nanbei, why are you crying? Can you be a little more promising? The old abbot has become a Buddha, not dead. Cry when you cry, laugh when you laugh, eat when you eat, sleep when you sleep, and recite when you recite. When the wooden fish rings, I am Buddha. This is what my master taught me. Come on, how stupid are you? You can't even comprehend Buddhism. If you become a Buddha, who will be willing to believe in Buddhism in the future? By the way, stupid Nanbei, speaking of the wooden fish, why haven't I seen my father let you knock it? My family doesn't have it either. That's true, but our stingy neighbor, Baldi Hui Ning, did hide a very precious wooden fish. I heard from my mother that it was carved from the wutong tree of Shishu. If you hit it with all your might, you could hear it from dozens of miles away. Are you serious? Of course not. Once, Master's wife wanted to go down the mountain to buy a set of clothes that she liked for a long time. Coincidentally, Master didn't have any extra money, so he took me out to hide from Master's wife and secretly met with Abbot Hui Ning to drink. Abbot Hui Ning drank happily and sat on the ground holding the wooden fish for most of the night. At that time, I stood outside the door to keep a lookout for them. I didn't feel that the wooden fish was very loud. Actually, Master's wife was thinking about the value of the wooden fish. Once, when Master's wife saw me washing clothes, she let it slip. She said that in the future, she must bring the wooden fish home and then give it to you as a dowry. How impressive! My mother! No wonder every time my mother saw Baldi Hui Ning a few years ago, she would ask him how old he was. Alas, fortunately, my mother only wandered around the small town at the foot of the mountain and never went into the Jianghu. Otherwise, which young master would be willing to pay attention to her? Anyway, Master is watching over Master's wife, and Master's wife isn't willing to go into the Jianghu. Besides, Master's wife always said that the women at the foot of the mountain are either tigresses that eat people without spitting out their bones or foxes that only have skin but not brains. Especially that great peace city, the streets are full of shameless and indecent women. It has always been Master's forbidden area. How can Master's wife be at ease with Master? Otherwise, Master's wife wouldn't have followed Master to the capital this time, right? Wu Nanbei, do you believe that I won't tell my mother? Ba, Master, no wonder you don't talk back every time Master's wife scolds you. The more you say, the more mistakes you make. I kind of understand. Stupid Nanbei, what are you muttering about? On the road, the young girl puffed up her cheeks and clenched her fists as if she was knocking on the wooden fish. Dong dong dong, when the wooden fish sounds, I am Buddha. Yaya, dong dong dong. The young monk secretly turned his head and snickered. On this day, the sun was warm. As the center of Beimang's southern dynasty, Xijing City was originally called Good Son-in-Law City. It was once just a normal city. With the influx of scholars from the north, it gradually had deep and secluded courtyards in Jiangnan. It had thick black tiles and white walls in the style of respecting one's ancestors. It had the private library of an aristocratic family that cultivated and studied. It had the unfamiliar sounds of reading, elegant high hats and broad belts, beautiful women's long dresses that dragged on the ground, and all kinds of food that dazzled the locals. Good Son-in-Law City became more and more prosperous day by day until it became Beimang's auxiliary capital. With continuous expansion, there was a court where the local nobles and foreign scholars each occupied half of the country. There was a system of 3 provinces and 6 departments. There were many talents, and it was beautiful. With the passage of more than 20 years, this city seemed to have grown from a thin little girl into a plump, beautiful woman. Then, on this imperial road that was slightly more deserted than usual, a group of people walked slowly. The leader was an old woman. The old woman's age was naturally not something that new Xijing City could compare with. The old woman with an old fox fur draped over her shoulders was followed by an old Confucian scholar. Further behind, there was a middle-aged swordsman with a sword and a burly man in his 50s walking side by side. The old woman suddenly chuckled softly and said, "I heard that our war god met that family of 3 at Mount Hui, but they didn't fight." The old man in the green shirt nodded. Chapter 1281. The old woman lamented, "Is there a fragrance outside the walls? Why are the 2 people I admire heading to Liang? One of them dared to charge to the foot of the imperial capital's walls alone and meet my gaze. The other one is a sect by himself. If I remember correctly, this sect with only one person is ranked higher than the princess's grave and your chess and sword music school, right? If they are willing to stay in Beimang. Forget it, let's not talk about it." The chess and sword music school had 4 masters at its peak. Although Huang Baozhu, or the devil Luo Yang, had betrayed Beimang, Hong Jing'an was already the leader of the Ruren cavalry. Sword Qi Jin and the ancestor of the bronze statue were also among the top masters in Beimang. Who in the world would dare to underestimate the chess and sword music school? The old man who looked like a shabby old scholar smiled. If that wasn't the case, wouldn't the Jianghu be a lot less fun? The old woman turned to look at the middle-aged man with a sword. "Huang Qing, do you have a chance of winning against that person?" She wasn't asking about his chances of winning, but whether he had a chance of winning. The person who was asked nodded. Although the answer wasn't a pleasant surprise, it wasn't to the extent of disappointing the old woman. Huang Qing's real name was Sun Xiaopu. The chess and sword music school's name was Sword Qi Jin, and he was also Hong Jingyan's master. Because of the Liang dynasty's ridicule of the Beimang sword forest's lack of manpower, some people even declared that no one in Beimang could talk about the way of the sword. Because of this, he changed his name to Huang Qing. The old woman who could make Sword Qi Jin her retainer was obvious. This aging female eagle had been flying in the sky above all the other eagles in the grassland for far too long. The 4 of them walked into the palace of Xijing. Then, under the careful guidance of the eunuch from the ceremony directorate, only Empress Murong and the prefect of peace entered a secluded attic. Inside the attic, there was a grayish-black hornless dragon vat made of an unknown material. The vat was less than half a person's height, but it was so huge that it occupied most of the attic's main hall. Empress Murong placed her hands on the cool rim of the round vat, squinting her eyes as she looked at the clear water in it. This vat was called Slumber. Only after she had usurped the throne did someone secretly enter the palace to report to her that there was a dragon hibernating at the bottom of the vat. At a glance, he couldn't tell if there was a flood dragon, but the scene in his line of sight was already strange enough. There was no wind or waves. The surface of the water was clearly still, but it was uneven everywhere. If one were to look carefully, one could vaguely see that there were many small carps of different colors floating in the water. Empress Murong raised her head and looked around. Other than the prefect of peace beside her, there were only 9 people in the room. Among them, there was the immortal Nanming, who was second only to the state preceptor Yuan Qingshan in Daoist sect, the most secretive qi cultivator in Beimang, and the astrologer Yelu Guanzhu, whose ancestors had been predicting the future for the Beimang royal family. Even Huang Songpu, the former king of the southern courtyard in the Southern Dynasty, had not seen the 9 real hermits who had lived here for decades. As for the other dignitaries in the Southern Dynasty, they did not expect to see them. They probably did not know that there was such a strange attic in Western capital, such an inexplicable vat, and so many strange people gathered here. Empress Murong asked softly, "Where is Zhao Dun, the Prince of Liang, who said that he would not attend the court because he was unwell?" Immortal Nanming, who had a head full of white hair but a face as tender as a child, walked to Empress Murong's side with a thin purple bamboo pole. He extended the pole and gently drew a small circle at a spot 2 feet above the water surface. The 100-year-old elder immortal of Daoist sect, whose voice was no different from a child's, said crisply, "Judging from the position, Zhao Dun has indeed secretly patrolled the border as the spider web reported." Empress Murong's finger lightly tapped the edge of the vat and sneered, "He's only at the age of knowing his destiny. He's going to die in front of an old woman like me. How pitiful." The surroundings were silent. No one dared to answer. She asked again, "Other than the little thing representing Chen Zhibao that suddenly grew a dragon claw, is there anything else worth mentioning?" Immortal Nanming used the purple bamboo pole to point at a spot a little further south than before. Zhang Julu's tail fell 4 feet into the vat and is about to sink to the bottom. The old woman laughed. "What a Liang dynasty's deer that committed suicide." At this moment, the place that the old immortal Nanming was pointing at should be Great Peace City. After Immortal Qilin's ascension, the new sect master of Daoist sect was expressionless. He moved the pole and pointed at the northwest direction. "Su Fengnian is still around Huayang Pass." Suddenly, a small black carp less than 2 inches long jumped out of the water. Then, it didn't fall back to its original position. Instead, it shifted slightly to the west. Empress Murong frowned. "This is?" Immortal Nanming still used his childish voice to say unhurriedly, "It's Su Longxiang." Some martial artists who haven't entered the celestial phenomenon realm but are blessed with providence will be indistinct even if they occupy a spot in the vat, unless their qi leaks too much. It's even more so for those qi cultivators who are good at restraining their qi. But once they leak the secrets of heaven, it's hard for them to escape the net of justice. As for those who are close to earth immortals, their natal fish will even disturb the water in the vat. For example, Wudong sect master Liufu. Previously, this person caused the secrets of heaven to tremble, causing the vat's water to overflow. Anything else? Huang Longshi, Tantai Pingjing and Xie Feiyu. The 3 people who originally had the most vague clues have shown signs one after another. Then Chao Changqing. Since he became the scholarly sage, he naturally jumped out of the vat. Empress Murong thought for a moment and said to herself, "Could it be that Lu Gui's main force has already encountered the Long Xiang army?" Immortal Nanming hesitated and shook his head. "No. Su Longxiang should have gone to the west of Azure City and encountered the Chang cavalry." The old woman's face was gloomy, but it soon relaxed. "Anyway, you have 2 sons." The imperial decree of peace guessed what Empress Murong was thinking and said calmly, "Since there's a flaw, we can let Huang Qing and Copper Man assassinate Su Longxiang. Such an opportunity will be hard to come by in the future." The old woman pressed her thumb on the edge of the vat and asked, "Can they make it in time?" The old scholar who was the imperial tutor of Beimang smiled and said, "Let them rush there as fast as possible. After that, it'll depend on their luck." The old woman smiled and said, "Then let's give it a try." The imperial decree of peace turned around and walked out of the room without hesitation to instruct Huang Qing. The old woman asked and answered her own question. If it succeeds, will there still be a war in Liuzhou after so many rounds of scheming? No. Chapter 1282. The Hall of Merit had the diligent room, which was different from the Imperial College. It was for the children of the Zhao family to study. Because the legitimate princes, other than the crown prince of the Eastern Palace, had to be conferred the title of Prince of the Eastern Palace, the diligent room was where the children of the Prince of the capital studied. A small number of descendants of officials who were conferred the title of Marquis were also allowed to enter this place, which was known as the Little Imperial Study. The diligent room had the two positions of junior tutor and junior tutor leading the study of politics. In addition, there were more than 20 teachers with high status who taught the Confucian classics and were personally appointed by the emperor to be the personal teacher of a certain prince or descendant. All of them were great writers of the dynasty. Occasionally, there would be a knowledgeable and highly respected Dahuang who would enter to give a lecture. That group of dragon sons and grandsons, as well as the children of nobles and nobles, entered the diligent room at the age of rushing into the age. Every day they would study for 10 hours, day after day, year after year, all the way until they were married and conferred nobility. Regardless of whether it was winter or summer, they studied without stopping. This tradition had been unshakable for the past 20 years, from the previous emperor to the current emperor. Moreover, the rules of the diligent room were complex and extremely strict. The students who entered the room did not hold a fan in summer or add charcoal in winter. Regardless of their status, they had to bow to the teachers they met on the way. If they made a minor mistake, they would be punished with a bamboo punishment. If the current emperor wrote a couplet, "Stand with sincerity, learn the truth," and hung it on both sides. Other than the obscure Prince Zhao Kai, all of the children, including the crown prince Zhao Zhuan and the eldest prince Zhao Wu, had spent a long time in the diligent room. If the position of junior tutor and junior tutor was said to be extraordinary and was expected to be conferred the title of Marquis, then the teachers of the diligent room were worthy of being called the emperor's teacher. As for the two positions of junior tutor and junior tutor, they had always been empty. The two masters of the Song family had dominated the literary world for 30 years, but they still could not obtain this position. The previous junior tutor, Ma Rong, was the teacher of the previous emperor and the current emperor. He was not well known outside of the capital, but 4 years ago, when Ma Rong died of illness, the emperor and the empress personally went to the mourning hall of the Ma family to wear mourning clothes and keep vigil for a night. After Ma Rong's death, the positions of junior tutor and junior protector were empty. The nobles of Tai and city all thought that Qi Yanglong, who had just entered the capital, would temporarily assume the position of junior protector as a transitional position between the past and the future, and then become the official leader of the Liang dynasty in one fell swoop. However, a young man, who didn't even have the qualifications to assume the position of junior protector, abruptly barged into everyone's eyes and took the position of junior protector. This person had obtained the title of Jinshi at the tail end of the Yonghui era, but he was far less eye-catching than the top three. He had entered the Hanlin Academy and served as the Yellow Gatekeeper, but he was also lukewarm. It wasn't until he became the daily librarian of the Imperial Study in the Forbidden City that he received a few more glances from the important figures in the capital. However, that was all. Later on, this person was quietly promoted to the Minister of Meritorious Contributions Department, assisting the Minister of Personnel, Zhao Yuling, and his old superior, Prime Minister, Yin Maochun. He had successively participated in the imperial investigations and the local grade evaluations, two major events that were enough to determine the status of a fourth-rank official in Liang. This scholar, who could be considered a young man in the imperial court, was the one who truly made people speechless. In the imperial investigations that were held once every 3 years, this person still didn't reveal himself. However, in the South grade evaluations, this person was truly vicious and merciless, removing the official status of the governor of Pingzhou and 6 county governors in one fell swoop. It had only been 3 months, and he was quickly transferred back to the capital. Otherwise, everyone in the court believed that this person would have died on the way to the south. So much so that when he became the diligent junior protector of the house, most people were numb to it. This person's path of promotion in the officialdom was too obscure, leaving no opportunity for people to give him a cold shoulder. In the end, people only knew that he had married a nameless princess a few years ago, and that she was a relative of the imperial family. In the imperial court, he had never participated in the struggle between factions, nor was he close to civil and military officials. He had never interacted with the eunuchs in the palace, not even once drinking wine with prostitutes. There were very few people who wanted to get to the bottom of things, and after they learned the truth, they became more and more confused. This person was actually from Beiliang? Originally, it was already very surprising that the court had produced Jin San Lang, who had made a meteoric rise. Unexpectedly, this person's fame was even greater than that. It should be known that Jean Lanting's path of promotion could not be said to be glorious. It was said that first, he had relied on a recommendation letter from the old Prince Liang to enter the officialdom in the capital. Later, he had squeezed his way into the government through the elegant tricks of Lanting Shuxian. And as a fellow countryman of the Right Chancellor of the Imperial College, he had a clean background, and his path of promotion was open and clean. Even though he had married a princess, there had not been any rumors of a husband depending on his wife's status. And over the years, he had held several positions in the capital. Whether it was the short-term Huang Men of the Hanlin Academy, the long-term Eastern Palace assistant lecturer, or the even shorter-term household assistant manager, he had always been a scholar who was quite close to the imperial family. It was likely that even if he were to shout on the streets that he was from Beiliang, no one would be willing to believe him. He was a scholar born in Beiliang, Qinhuang. Of course, nowadays, everyone in the capital should respectfully address him as Qin Xiaobao. Today, in the diligent room, it was only 4:45 in the morning. The sky was still dusky, but the sound of reading could already be heard. The diligent room was divided into upper, middle, and lower rooms. Generally speaking, 6 to 9 years old were in the lower room, 10 to 15 years old were in the middle room, and 15 years old and above were in the upper room. Among them, the age of the women was calculated separately. Only when the men and women were married and had obtained the approval of the teachers could they withdraw from the school. Today was Confucian Day. In each of the 3 rooms, there was an elder reading the classics of the Confucian sage Zhang Sheng. The degree of difficulty was naturally different. Outside the lower room of the diligent room stood a young scholar, wearing a purple robe and a mutton-fat jade belt bestowed by the emperor. He looked at the young children who were shaking their heads and doing their best to recite the classics. According to the rules set by the previous emperor, they were not allowed to wear a marten hat or fur coat in the room. The winter cold was bone-piercing. At this time, there was only a small copper stove placed under the teacher's desk. Most of the children who were born with the same surname as the country were no different from the children of poor families attending private schools. Most of their cheeks were frozen red, and their hands and feet were trembling. Taking advantage of the time when the teacher was reading, they hurriedly lowered their heads and blew a mouthful of hot air on their frozen fingers. Outside the room, in addition to this scholar who was dressed in special clothes and was quite unfamiliar to the eyes of ordinary people, there was also an old eunuch in the palace who was allowed to wear a red python robe. He stood outside carefully. The old eunuch was a little absent-minded and did not notice the arrival of the scholar. This was not surprising. He said that he had to keep an eye on the diligent room in case of accidents, but he had been standing here for more than 10 years. He had changed 7 or 8 robes. After more than 10 years, the affairs of the palace had always been strict, so how could there be any accidents? No matter how they acted outside after coming of age, the domineering children of the Zhao family all stood respectfully like him when they were studying, while they sat there obediently reading and reciting books. Even famous princes and princesses like Zhao Wu and Zhao Fengya had to tuck their tails between their legs after entering the diligent room and sitting down. The old eunuch looked outside the room and saw that a large red lantern had been hung on a branch in the courtyard after winter. He sighed quietly. He had heard that it was not peaceful outside. The remaining evildoers of the Guangling underworld had found a little girl surnamed Jiang from somewhere and revived the country just like that. Many of the old fellows in the palace who had escaped from the West Chu imperial palace back then were now trembling in fear. When they were free, they did not even dare to drink a few mouthfuls of wine, saying that they were afraid that others would misunderstand them and think that they were drowning their sorrows in wine. It seemed that the barbarians in the West were also not peaceful. If the big barbarian Beimang wanted to make trouble, the small barbarian Beiliang also wanted to make trouble. He could be considered to have seen some storms in his life, but he just could not understand why these fellows did not want to live a peaceful life. Why did they have to make trouble blindly? Even that grand secretary was obsessed. Say, you Bai Yen are not even as old as me, a eunuch, But you have already achieved such a high position. Why are you still not satisfied? Isn't this clearly seeking your own death? For no reason, the old eunuch thought of the flowers and plants in the courtyard and could not help but sigh. He thought to himself, Grand Secretary, human lives were not like those plants. If they were gone this winter, they would be there again next spring. At this time, a small and tiptoeing figure appeared outside the courtyard. He bent over and trotted in. As a result, when he saw the old eunuch who looked like a door god, he immediately looked as if his parents had died. The old eunuch only dared to laugh in his heart. This little fellow was the grandson of Commandery Prince Feng. Although he was not the eldest grandson of the eldest branch, he was still very doted on. However, this child had always been a punching bag in the lower branch. After all, the title of Commandery Prince Feng could frighten people outside the palace, but here, no one took it seriously. In addition, the little fellow's body was weak and his temperament was soft. He was bullied all day long to the point that he did not dare to go home and complain to his elders. Even if he changed into a new pair of festive boots, they would be trampled into old ones by those naughty fellows. He looked at the child's sickly pale face and his pitiful appearance as he desperately covered his mouth to prevent himself from coughing. Although the old eunuch felt sorry for him, he, a eunuch, did not dare to violate the rules set by the previous emperor. If he was late once, he would be punished with bamboo. If he was late twice, he would be demoted. If he was late 3 times, he would be demoted again. Until he had no more rank to demote, he would be directly expelled from the diligent room. About 10 years ago, in the hands of the emperor, there was a lawless old prince who was the only legitimate grandson. He was directly demoted to a commoner. The old eunuch stopped the sweaty grandson of Commandery Prince Feng. With a cold face, he said, "If I remember correctly, this is the 2nd time you have been late. You go in first. I will record it and send it to the imperial clan court." The child coughed and said intermittently, "Grandfather Lu, I really did not mean to be late. I have a cold." The old eunuch waved his hand. He was not willing to listen to the child's explanation. The royal family was not a big or small matter. This was the principle that the elders in the palace had taught the younger generation with countless bloody facts. He was only a servant. Why should he seek trouble for himself? Chapter 1283. It was at this moment that the old eunuch realized that there was a dazzling purple color beside him. He was shocked and even more shocked. After he came back to his senses and was about to bow, that person smiled and shook his head. The old eunuch, who was already the head eunuch of the palace, could only bow. The scholar in purple robes and jade belt walked to the old eunuch's side and grabbed the child's cold hand. He used a bit of force to pry open the child's fingers, only to discover that the child had coughed up blood. The scholar looked at the teary-eyed child and smiled gently. He rubbed the child's head and didn't say anything. He took the child's other hand and crossed the threshold of the lower room. The lecturer in the room was a famous literary figure from the Hanlin Academy. He glanced at the scholar's robes and then at the late child with a displeased expression. However, no matter how far this literary figure had distanced himself from the quarrels of officialdom, he was still somewhat afraid of the deep meaning of the purple robes. He stopped his recitation and reached out to grab a bamboo whip from the desk. With a straight face, he said to the child, "Zhao Li, stretch out your hand." The child was about to step forward to accept his punishment when the scholar, who was no older than 30, said in a warm voice, "Lecturer Han, Zhao Li isn't being naughty. He just caught a cold and coughed up blood at such a young age." Yet he still insisted on entering the room to study. In the end, this is pardonable. The demotion from the imperial clan court is unavoidable, but can this bamboo punishment be waived? The old scholar snorted coldly, "Waive the bamboo punishment? What kind of scandal is this?" The scholar still smiled faintly and said, "The law is nothing more than human feelings." The old keeper cast a sidelong glance at this latecomer far above the rest, junior, and sneered, "Law, sentiment, and reason. Even Grand Chancellor Qi doesn't dare to say which of the 3 is more important. I wonder where did Lord Junior Guardian learn from?" Chen Wang, who was destined to become the first Lord Junior Guardian of the auspicious Talisman era, said calmly, "This junior is self-taught and has no teacher. However, Chen Wang secretly believes that as long as there is a reason in the world, there is no distinction between big and small. The Confucian sage Zhang said it, the emperor said it, and even the common people said it. Official Han sneered, "Then I'll have to ask one more question. This is a reason that anyone can say, but who can prove it?" Chen Wang laughed softly and said, "It's nothing more than the 4 words of the conscience of heaven and earth. The heaven is fair, the earth is sorrowful, and the two do not interfere with each other. Man is not a plant, how can he not be heartless? Man is not a beast, how can he not have compassion?" Official Han's face was ashen as he tightly gripped the bamboo whip that he had used to beat countless descendants of the dragon clan. "Other people might respect you and be a bit afraid of you, Chen Wang, but I, Han Yusheng, would not take you, a Bailiang barbarian, seriously." The keeper was just about to explode in anger when he noticed a rare guest standing by the door, clad in a bright yellow robe. He quickly put down his bamboo whip and rose to bow. The other children also rose to their feet and saluted. "Greetings, Your Highness the Crown Prince." Zhao Zhuan laughed heartily and said, "I've disturbed Scholar Han's teachings. Forgive me, forgive me. There is one thing I must explain to Scholar Han." Zhao Li's nephew was on his way to the diligent room when I stopped him and inquired about his well-being for a long time, causing him to be delayed. "I will personally inform the Imperial Clan Court. As for the bamboo punishment, if Scholar Han is afraid of breaking the rules, I will take the punishment for Zhao Li. Furthermore, this child is suffering from a severe cold. I have to ask Han Yusheng for a leave of absence. Studying is important, but the body is even more important. We study, we study. It doesn't matter if we die from studying. Studying is a good thing, the more the better. But if we die from studying, then it won't be pretty." Han Yusheng hurriedly smiled and said, "Your Highness is too serious, too serious." With the Crown Prince pleading for leniency, Han Yusheng didn't dare to argue. He didn't feel that he was insulting the educated. He only felt that if Sage Zhang were alive, he would do the same. Well, didn't Chen Xiaobao say before that the law is nothing more than human feelings? Zhao Zhuan rubbed Zhao Li's little head and said with a smile, "Don't forget to ask your aunt for more sweets in the future." Then he let the old eunuch lead Zhao Li to find an imperial physician. He walked with Chen Wang on a dark path. After a moment of silence, he joked, "Chen Wang, it seems like you're not happy being the junior guardian." Chen Wang laughed and dismissed it. Zhao Zhuan stopped and looked at this guy. He asked seriously, "It's said that a place's environment nurtures a place's people. You and our unyielding Jin Sanlang are both people of Bailiang. Why are you so different?" Chen Wang hesitated and shook his head. He said self-deprecatingly, "A place's environment also has its own differences. It seems that when I, Chen Wang, was practicing writing with firewood in the snow, the Right Chancellor was already thinking about how to develop high-quality rice paper." Zhao Zhuan said helplessly, "With your personality, who would dare to let you be a local official?" This "who" obviously wasn't referring to him in general. It was referring to him, the Crown Prince who was supposed to be the regent of the country. Chen Wang smiled. "If I were to be sent out, I'd at most be a county magistrate. If my official hat was bigger, it wouldn't be stable." Zhao Zhuan patted his shoulder. "Do you think I'm stupid to be willing to use a sledgehammer to crack a nut?" Chen Wang didn't reply. Zhao Zhuan suddenly asked, "How do you evaluate the Grand Secretary and Chancellor Qi?" Chen Wang didn't hold back and said straightforwardly, "Zhang Julu's personality is strict and fearsome, like the scorching summer. Qi Yanglong's personality is gentle and cute, like the warm winter day. No matter if it's their ability to govern the country or their personal integrity, they are close to saints. It's my honor to be able to be an official with them." Chapter 1284. Zhao Zhuan sighed. "It's a pity that a mountain cannot accommodate 2 tigers." Zhao Zhuan quickly smiled. "The Minister of Revenue, Wang Xiongui, may go to Guangling as the administrator. Do you have any thoughts about this empty position? Yin Maochun will definitely look down on this small temple, so you don't have to worry about competing with him. The Minister of Appointments, Zhao Yuling, the Minister of Rights, Bai Guo, and the Minister of Revenue, Wang Xiongui. Along with the Prime Minister, Yin Maochun, They were all once the favorite students of Grand Secretary Zhang Julu and Tantan. Now, only Wang Xiongui, who was publicly acknowledged as the least talented of the 4 scholars of Yonghui, was still persisting in supporting the facade. It sounded like even Wang Xiongui was going to leave, and to become the Guangling administrator, the biggest joke in the world. Even a blind person would understand the meaning of the imperial court's words. To kill a flying tiger, first cut off its wings. Chen Wang only shook his head and said nothing. Zhao Zhuan grunted and reflected, I was too hasty. Not only did I not help you, I even made you the target of public criticism. You're halfway through a journey of 100 li. Zhao Zhuan seemed to be talking to himself. Father is secretly patrolling the borders. It doesn't seem like a good idea to drag it out and delay the court session. Chen Wang, who had once been evaluated by Ma Rong as being prudent, did not say these 2 words. However, Zhao Zhuan looked at the dawn sky in the east, and his eyes were already burning. Regent. After Zhao Zhuan withdrew his gaze, he was once again the gentle and gentlemanly crown prince. He smiled. I heard that Mr. Yuan brought someone with him on his travels. Chen Wang asked, Can I tell you? Zhao Zhuan smiled helplessly. Why can't you and I talk about it? That person is the young phoenix of the Song family, Song Kelly, who is regarded as a fallen phoenix. Chen Wang asked doubtfully, Isn't Song Kelly a county magistrate in a county north of Guangling? This person is quite accomplished in suppressing the bandits. This is an impressive achievement, but it was deliberately suppressed by the higher-ups. Zhao Zhuan took a deep look at Chen Xiaobao. Then, he smiled so widely that his eyes narrowed into a line. He pointed at the cautious guy with his finger and said, Keep pretending, keep pretending. Others might not be aware of Mr. Yuan's plan, but how could Chen Wang not grasp the crux of the matter? The Song family was destroyed in an instant. No matter how it appeared on the surface or what it did behind the scenes, most of the old foxes in the first 5 or 6 rows of the imperial court actually saw one thing clearly, but those who could see 2 chus were really not many. Grand Secretary Darren and Yin Maochun are definitely 2 of them. Next, even if there is only 1 person left, it will definitely be you, Chen Wang. Chen Wang didn't admit anything, but he didn't deny anything either. Zhao Zhuan sighed softly. Yin Maochun, Bai Gua, and Song Dongming were all Mr. Yuan's Minister of Concealment candidates. Even if the latter 2 were eliminated, Yin Maochun should have been the next Grand Secretary no matter how you look at it. Who would have thought that in the end, Song Kelly would quietly snatch the position from him? Chen Wang hesitated for a moment, then said, Mr. Yuan chose Song Kelly, but Grand Secretary Darren also made a choice. Zhao Zhuan was really confused about this matter. He asked curiously, It definitely wasn't Wang Xiongui, nor was it Zhao Yuling. Then who could it be? Chen Wang said calmly, The Minister of Rights, Bai Gua. Zhao Zhuan instinctively laughed. He clearly didn't believe this absurd statement. Bai Gua? Impossible, impossible. Even though Bai Gua has an excellent reputation throughout the court, and everyone in the capital's officialdom is close to him. I also admire this wanton and extremely talented Minister of Rights. But if you say that after more than a decade of careful selection, Zhang Julu finally chose Bai Gua, who had given up once, to be the next master of Gu Hut, I wouldn't believe it even if you beat me to death. Chen Wang said calmly, I can't really beat you to death, Your Highness. Zhao Zhuan froze for a moment, then burst into laughter. In his mind, Chen Wang was a person like this old man who would never joke. These words really opened his eyes. However, after laughing, Zhao Zhuan began to think deeply. In order to pave the way for him, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that his father had spared no effort and calculated everything. Among them, the one that gave his father the most headache and pain was undoubtedly the Minister of Rights, Green Eyes. After Zhao Zhuan acknowledged Grand Secretary Darren's contributions, he had absolutely no good impression of Zhang Julu. Before His Highness the Crown Prince, the 4th Prince Zhao Zhuan was extremely fearful of this Grand Secretary, who had no selfish desires even though he had the power to overturn the court. If Zhang Julu was only a scholarly sage who devoted himself to learning, he would at most be made into a statue by the court and placed on an altar beside Sage Zhang. It was very simple. However, Zhang Julu was different. He valued merit over learning. He was a typical powerful minister. In the depths of Zhao Zhuan's heart, he felt that Zhang Julu was a lifeless living dead. He wanted nothing more than to stay away from him. If Zhang Julu really did as Chen Wang said and chose his former favorite student Bai Guo to be his tomb keeper after his death, then Zhao Zhuan would have to carefully weigh the pros and cons. Song Kelly, who needed many years to mature, could be easily dealt with in the future even if Zhao Zhuan didn't have any tricks up his sleeve. This was just thinking about the future. This was because every new emperor was never afraid of any new officials. They were only afraid of those old officials. It was obvious that Bai Guo could become a great threat close at hand. This was the immediate worry. Chen Wang didn't disturb the crown prince's thoughts. After waiting for a while, seeing that he still hadn't come back to his senses, he quietly turned around and left. After a long time, Zhao Zhuan opened his arms and stretched. He turned his head and didn't see Chen Wang. Zhao Zhuan left alone. The sky was also bright. Chapter 1285. At the end of the first year of Xiangfu, the first snow suddenly fell. If it did not fall, it would be a heavy snowfall. However, compared to previous years, it was said that this year, there were 70 to 80% fewer visitors in and out of Great Peace City. It would probably cause the scattered stalls to make less money. There were countless Zhang mansions in the capital, but there was one mansion that was undoubtedly unique. Whether it was a local official who went to the capital or a scholar who went abroad to study, as long as they casually asked the people in the capital where Zhang mansion was, the latter would definitely not bother to ask which Lord Zhang it was and would directly give the answer. Even if it was snowing heavily, and the snow on the imperial path was so thick that it could not be swept clean, the court sessions still continued. Also, it was a sensitive time for the crown prince to be regent. Which official would have the guts to be late? But today, there was one person missing in the imperial court. Without him, everyone was shocked and absent-minded. Even the crown prince, who was in charge of supervising the country, appeared to be in a trance. This person who was absent from court for the first time did not ask for leave. It was as though he was telling the crown prince and all the civil and military officials a simple truth. If I am not coming, I am not coming. His Highness the Crown Prince ignored this. He did not have the chief eunuch go and ask about his well-being, nor did he fly into a rage. The Minister of Rights, Bai Guo, who could make a big fuss over a small matter, was the same. He acted as though nothing had happened. Some people wanted to use this as a pretext to make a fuss, but after hesitating for a while, they did not dare. After all, even Third Jean had sewn his mouth shut today. This official who made the entire court session seem like it was not a court session was the Grand Secretary Zhang Julu. He and the emperor who was patrolling the borders were the most diligent people in the court. However, one was the first among the monarchs, and the other was the first among the officials. Zhang Julu was not feeling well today. After putting on the purple robes of the standard first rank, he suddenly did not want to attend morning court. Therefore he did not go. This old man, whose sideburns were turning white, had been sitting under the eaves since early in the morning. He did not change into more comfortable and warm clothes. The old housekeeper of the mansion had brought in a simple stove made of bamboo strips, and had added charcoal to the stove many times. In Zhang Julu's life, other than a few times when his good friend Tantanon forced him to drink a few cups or two, he almost never drank. He insisted that drinking would make things worse. However, with nothing to do today and nothing to do in the future, the old man still did not have the slightest intention of drinking. When it was close to noon, he carelessly ate some of the rough homemade pastries and continued to flip through the nameless poetry collection in his hands. Zhang Julu's ability to govern was outstanding in the world. Most likely, even those powerful political opponents who still had the strength to fight when he first started his career would not deny it against their will. However, Zhang Julu came from the Hanlin Academy. Other than the artistic essays he wrote when he was young that could be considered sloppy and had some talent, whether it was in memorials or memorials, the wording of his speech and the words themselves, they were all dull and tasteless. After so many years, there was not a single good work of a famous teacher that was passed down. There were also no rumors that he favored a literary master, and no comments that added the finishing touch to a good work. From an outsider's point of view, The Grand Secretary seemed to have a natural resistance to writing. In reality, only Huan Wen knew that his old friend Zhang Julu did not hesitate to write, but he would also fall in love with the good works of many scholars, especially the good sentences that added the finishing touch. Whether it was the frontier poems, the resentment poems, or the sentimental poems, the funeral essays, they all had their own preferences. They were all collected in that self-edited poetry collection. For example, the Takaoka Ouyang family's memorial to their father in Shangyin Academy, the Chu War declaration that Zhao Chongling personally carried the sword in the Battle of the Western Wall, and so on. Zhang Julu would occasionally flip through them. Among them was Huang Longshi's "The Yellow River runs for more than 1,000 miles to the north, the air of grievance turns into black clouds." There was also that line by that person who had been scolded as Mei Su Mei Liang back then, "There is no war in the horizon, the energy of war dissipates into the sun and moonlight." There was also a famous palace resentment line from an unknown person in the previous dynasty: "Outsiders do not see a smile, the heavenly treasures last year's is a gift for the world." Su Weisheng's took up a lot of space among the 300 or so. Even some of the poems that Su Fengnian had clearly bought with a large sum of money were included. This was probably the so-called magnanimity of the Prime Minister. The old steward suddenly jogged up the steps and said in a low voice, "Old master, the young master has come." Zhang Julu was slightly puzzled, but did not say anything. While his son and daughter-in-law feared him as a father, he was not unreasonable to the point that his children were not allowed to disturb him. However, the eldest son and second son had soft personalities and were somewhat pedantic from a young age. After they got married and started their careers, the two daughters-in-law came from a small family. If not for the Grand Secretary's blessing of having two grandchildren, they would not dare to come here and ask for trouble. The youngest son, Zhang Bianguan, was an anomaly among the three sons. His personality was the most stubborn, but his relationship with the Zhang manor was also the most rigid. It was as if father and son would never have any contact with each other. For Zhang Bianguan to take the initiative to walk into this manor was indeed like the sun rising from the west. Although Zhang Julu's face was expressionless, he still unconsciously glanced in the direction of the courtyard gate. Even a vicious tiger would not eat its cubs. How many fathers in the world truly loathe their own sons? Chapter 1286. Zhang Bianguan was still as sloppy as ever. He ran into the yard with an item in his hand that was not commonly seen in the capital. It was a small copper stove made of bamboo that was popular in the countryside of Jiangnan. Inside, there was a charcoal fire covered in ash for warmth. The elderly all liked to carry this item when they went out for a walk or chatted at home. The ancestral home of the Zhang family was south of the Guangling River. Before Zhang Julu made a name for himself in the imperial examinations, he often used this when he was studying hard. After all, compared to a large stove, it saved a lot of charcoal fire. Even poor families could use it if they gritted their teeth. After he became famous in the capital, only his grandfather, who had moved to Tian City to live out his retirement, occasionally used it. Who knew where Zhang Bianguan had gotten such an old antique from? Zhang Bianguan asked the steward for some new charcoal to pour into the stove. He also shoveled some ash from the large bamboo stove under Zhang Julu's feet. Crouching on the ground, he finished fiddling with it and handed it to Zhang Julu. Zhang Julu was startled. He took it and placed it on his lap. With one hand holding the book and the other holding the stove, the warmth immediately increased. Zhang Bianguan asked for a small stool from the steward and grumbled endlessly, "How old are you? You don't know how to admit your old age. You insist on admiring the snow outside and reading to act like a hero." The steward smiled knowingly and left. These words could only be said by the young master. The other two young masters would never dare to say such things. The old master only needed to give them a slightly impatient glance, and the two young masters, who only knew how to bury themselves in books, would tremble in fear. Even in the summer, it was as if they were walking on thin ice. Zhang Bianguan used an iron pincer to stir the charcoal fire in the stove and said to himself, "I heard from the marketplace that your words as the Grand Secretary are becoming more and more useless today. Many 5th and 6th level minor officials dare to be sloppy. Other than Wang Xionggui's Ministry of Revenue and Ministry of Rights, which can be considered honest, the Ministry of Appointments, Ministry of War, Ministry of Works, and Ministry of Justice all have countermeasures against Zhang Bianguan's policies, especially the Hanlin Academy and Imperial College. Every few days, the noble officials and scholars will come up with a few new poems that borrow from the past to satirize the present. There are even some who say that the emperor is patrolling the borders. Earlier, he went to Liao to clean up the corruption case between the internal and external courts. Now, he is going to Jizhou to overturn the case of the Han family. If you want to talk about it, even a basket of them won't be enough. Zhang Julu calmly asked, "Didn't you also say that right now, it's just some low-level officials who are stirring up trouble?" Zhang Bianguan placed his hands on the stove to warm the fire. He didn't even raise his head. Gusts of cold wind rise from underground. If we don't stop it in time, when the evil rain falls on our heads, can we still be saved? Zhang Julu impatiently said, "That's it? If you're done, you can leave." Zhang Bianguan suddenly raised his head. His eyes were red as he asked, "This time, I actually want to talk about two things. First, there was an imperial censor who accused my eldest brother of embezzling fertile land and my second brother of cheating in the imperial examination. Others are cursing you, the Grand Secretary. I don't care, and I don't have the ability to interfere. But why do you have to treat my two brothers so lowly? You clearly have the ability to interfere, so why do you have to swallow your anger? Even if the ending is the same, and I'm just a pile of mud who doesn't care, can't you let my two brothers die a bit more honorably?" Zhang Julu calmly said, "Your second brother cheated in the imperial examination. He said that the 6th place in the provincial examination had an improper origin. Although I didn't incite him to do anything back then, if you think about it carefully, it can be considered true. After all, the chief examiner appointed by the emperor at that time was my disciple. With your second brother's craftsmanship, although it wouldn't be difficult for him to pass the provincial examination, to obtain the title of the chief examiner was no different from a fool's dream. As for your eldest brother embezzling fertile land," Zhang Bianguan angrily said, "My eldest brother, that bookworm, and my eldest sister-in-law, every time they come to the residence, they wear the exact same clothes and jewelry that can be considered valuable. How can they compete with the common people? For the sake of his reputation, your Grand Secretary has never taken a look at eldest brother's official residence. I, Zhang Bianguan, have been there countless times. I know better than anyone what kind of poor life eldest brother and sister-in-law lead." Zhang Julu interrupted his youngest son's words and calmly said, "In the 8th year of Yonghui, I indeed helped your eldest brother purchase 300 mu of fertile land. My method was not honorable, but your eldest brother has always been kept in the dark." Zhang Bianguan was stunned. Then, tears immediately gushed out of his eyes. He muttered to himself, "Why is this? Why do you even have to scheme against your own son?" Zhang Julu looked at the snow in the courtyard. It was a vast expanse of white. No one had swept it away for half a day. Perhaps it was knee-deep. He softly said, "The so-called spring of Yonghui, all the officials in the imperial court are well aware. In the future, those who stand side by side will mostly come from humble families." Zhang Julu put down the book and stood up. He carried the small stove with both hands and muttered to himself, "The rule of humble families having no noble children has already been broken. The significance is great. Compared to the past when the great Emperor Qin established the Qin dynasty, the wandering scholars were no longer rootless duckweeds. However, in the past 800 years, everyone has deeply experienced the advantages and disadvantages of the noble families. In that case, in the next 800 years, will those poor scholars who have jumped over the Dragon's Gate today reflect on themselves? How much will they reflect on themselves? Poor scholars suddenly become rich and powerful. In the morning, they become field-salaried workers. In the evening, they ascend to the hall of heaven. Do you really think that anyone can control their own hearts in the dyed vat of officialdom? It is precisely these barefooted people who stand at a high position. Once they do evil, they have no bottom line." Zhang Julu smiled and said, "This door was opened by me, Zhang Julu. Then, looking at me, Zhang Julu, the Grand Secretary of the Imperial Court, who has been in power for 20 years, I have lost my reputation because of the corruption of my descendants. Does this count as giving a dose of refreshing medicine to the poor scholars and officials who have ascended to the Imperial Court in the future? Chapter 1287. Zhang Bianguan slowly raised his head. With tears streaming down his face, he said in a trembling voice, "Father, you are always so high and far-sighted, saying the loudest words under the heavens, doing the boldest things under the heavens. But have you forgotten to turn around and look down at us, your children?" Zhang Julu did not turn his head to look at his youngest son. He sneered and said, "What, are you afraid? That's right, who in this world is not afraid of death? Even those upright officials who frequently ask their families to prepare coffins and then generously go to their deaths are also afraid of death. For some reason, I thought of an interesting matter. Some of the officials who had been thrown into the imperial prison were not afraid of death, but they were more afraid of dying without knowing why. Almost all of them used charcoal pens to write suicide letters on the walls of the prison. Perhaps the common people did not know that a charcoal pen in the imperial prison cost several hundred taels of silver to buy. For the poorer ones, it was not a problem for them. Dipping their fingers in blood, they were still able to write a letter in blood that was both praiseworthy and tragic. Your eldest brother is inflexible. He cannot do this kind of thing that can accumulate prestige the most. Your second brother is slightly more clever. If he is lucky enough to become an upright and noble official, he would not dare to do it even if he wanted to. As for you, Zhang Bianguan, you probably feel it is beneath your dignity to do it?" Zhang Bianguan stood up and snatched the small stove from Zhang Julu's hands. He fiercely smashed it into the snowy ground below the steps. The raging charcoal fire that rolled out of the stove quickly dissipated. Zhang Julu did not care about this son's disobedient behavior. Not to mention licking his children's affection, he even wanted to personally serve his son's 3 bowls of death rice. Even if his son wanted to beat him, the Grand Secretary, a few times, it did not seem to be a big deal. Zhang Julu slowly turned his head. Looking at his ashen-faced youngest son, he asked, "Do you really think your eldest brother and second brother do not know the situation of the imperial court at all? Do you really think they do not know the fate of the entire Zhang family? Only you, Zhang Bianguan, can be smart all your life, but they can't be smart for once?" Zhang Julu retracted his gaze and sneered, "Then you are too self-righteous. Among my sons you, Zhang Bianguan, are the most thoughtful. But your 2 brothers are pedantic, but how can they be stupid? They have been influenced by the political situation for so many years. No matter how pure their thoughts are, they have long been enlightened." Zhang Bianguan squatted down and murmured, "Back then, you insisted that our 3 sons could only marry women from small families. You were waiting for this day, right? If she was a woman from a noble family, she would implicate many people. When the time comes when His Majesty the Emperor wants to kill people, he will also be overcautious. You really are a rarely seen Grand Secretary with a conscience, not making things difficult for the monarch sitting on the dragon throne. Eldest sister-in-law and second sister-in-law can both be considered to be good at managing their families. These years, their families can be considered to have benefited from the Zhang family's glory, profiting greatly in the open and in the dark, vaguely becoming a large family in the local counties. You even made an exception and turned a blind eye to this. Hey, you are doing this to make your conscience feel a bit better, right?" Zhang Julu did not say anything. Zhang Bianguan rubbed his cheeks. He looked at the small stove left behind by his grandfather in the snow and said quietly, "Father, in order to become a good official, from the very beginning at my grandparents' side, you were not a good son. Then, you were not a good husband. Then, when you came to our side, you were not a good father. In the end, you were not even a good grandfather. Was it really worth it?" Zhang Julu raised his hands and blew out a mouthful of fog. He smiled and said, "A good official?" Zhang Julu was in a daze. He still remembered that his best friend Tantanon had once said some drunken words. To him, it was easy to be a loyal and treacherous official, it was easy to be an honest and muddle-headed official, but it was the most difficult to be a good official sandwiched between the monarch and the common people. It was difficult to explain clearly in a few words. It was already very difficult to control the monarch's world, and it was even more difficult to win a good reputation in life or in death. Zhang Julu suddenly said, "When I was young, I read an anonymous frontier fortress poem. In it there was a line, riding a horse to the west, wanting to reach the sky, passing Qi to the west, feeling that the sky is low. I was especially fascinated. I always thought that if one day the official career was not successful, at worst I would just throw away the pen and join the army. I would go and see with my own eyes the scenery of the vast wilderness and the sky at the border. That way, my life would not be in vain. But later, when the official career was stable, after your mother gave birth to you, she gave you the name Bianguan." For some reason, Zhang Bianguan calmed down a lot. He squeezed out a smile and said self-mockingly, "Because of this unworthy name, I have been ridiculed for so many years by the group of second generation in the capital. They said that you, the Grand Secretary, should have been named Zhang Tian or Zhang Jingqing." Zhang Julu smiled and walked down the steps. He bent down to pick up the small stove. He picked up the iron tongs and put some charcoal into the fire. He handed it back to the young son and said softly, "I know that your hearts have been cold for many years. Father can't do anything." Zhang Bianguan was stunned and forgot to speak. Zhang Julu waved his hand and asked the steward to bring a small stool. After sitting down, he asked, "The reason for this trip, is it because Man Air asked for a letter of divorce from you? Do you feel that you can't vent your anger? You have been with the chicken and the dog for so many years, but at this juncture, she abandoned you and left? Do you feel like husband and wife are birds in the same forest and fly away separately in the face of disaster?" Zhang Bianguan, who was asked several questions in a row, shook his head and said, "I don't mind her doing this." Zhang Julu wanted to say something but stopped. In the end, he just said, "Don't be angry at her. Among the 3 daughters-in-law of the Zhang family, she has it the hardest. It's hard for her to be an evil person. She is such a smart and kind girl. Our Zhang family has let her down." Zhang Bianguan looked straight at his father. The latter asked back, "Do you understand?" Zhang Bianguan suddenly remembered something and suddenly choked with sobs. When a woman is ruthless, she is the most ruthless. When a woman is infatuated, she is the most deeply moved. Zhang Bianguan seemed to have untied the knot in his heart and nodded vigorously. Chapter 1288. Zhang Julu smiled and asked, "That Tantanon always said that even if one has eternal fame, it is not as good as a cup of wine when one was alive. In the past, I did not believe it. Why don't the 2 of us drink a few cups today?" Naturally, Zhang Bianguan would not refuse. Thus, the most powerful official in Jingdo and the most useless playboy of Great Pea City, this pair of strange father and son, separated by a stove, sat across from each other on a small stool and slowly drank wine. The wine jug was placed on the edge of the stove. Zhang Bianguan said, "Father, in reality, no one is angry at you." Zhang Julu drank a mouthful of wine and did not speak. Cup after cup, the father and son drank like this. The steward tiptoed over to deliver a second jug of wine. Along the way, he brought a thick fur coat for the Grand Secretary. In the end, Zhang Bianguan staggered away in a drunken stupor. Zhang Julu saw him to the gate of the mansion and gave the fur coat to his son to wear. Zhang Julu stood on the steps and reached out to catch some snowflakes in his hand. There was nothing one could do about the affairs of the world. When one could say it, one did not want to say it. When one wanted to say it, one could not say it. Perhaps half a year ago, no one would have believed that the West Chu Navy would be able to fight the Guangling Navy downstream like a lion hunting a rabbit. Like an arrow on a bowstring, they were only waiting to go down the river and head straight for the spring snow building. Even in the darkness, just by the light of the lanterns, those towering ships exuded a savage aura of war. Presumably, every old remnant of West Chu who saw this scene would find it hard to restrain their joy and sorrow. For 20 years, the world had only heard that the Bailiang cavalry was the best in the world. Did anyone remember the majestic sight of the Dechu Navy of the past? In the last few months, there had been an endless stream of old remnant people walking or riding carriages to the riverbank to look at this scene from afar. They either knelt or clasped their hands, all of them weeping and then laughing madly as they returned home to tell their old friends. Chao Changqing personally commanded the navy. The Divine Phoenix was named after the capital city of Dechu. A middle-aged Confucian scholar in green, who had been holding a lantern and admiring a painting, raised his head and gently extinguished the lantern. Walking out of the cabin on the top floor, he gazed toward the right bank of the Guangling River. He saw a group of cavalry dressed differently from the navy suddenly appear. Afterward, the leading knight and a few retainers leisurely crossed the river on a small boat. At the bow of the small boat stood a person. His figure was tall and slender. As the boat approached, the knight's face became clearer under the light. He was determined, conceited, and full of heroic spirit. He lacked the gentleness of a gentleman. However, this young man really couldn't ask for more. It would be strange if he was just a kind and gentle scholar who could trample the territory that Zhao Yi had painstakingly built for more than 10 years in 3 months. One of the deputy commanders of the Dechu Navy, Song Yuanhang, stood beside the Confucian scholar in green. After seeing the uninvited guest, he did not hide his displeasure at all. Not only him, but the Navy generals who had walked out of the cabins on the lower levels of the Divine Phoenix ship also did not have a good impression of this young man. It was not a bad thing for a young man to show off his ability, but to be so arrogant that he did not consider the rules as rules was rather annoying. Similarly, as the son of one of Dechu's most powerful families, Pei Sui, who had made great contributions earlier, was very humble. Ko Jianghuai, if it weren't for this person in charge of the navy helping him smooth things over, he would have long rolled up his things and scrammed back to Shangyin Academy to read his books on the art of war. Earlier, he had repeatedly disrupted the plan and acted on his own initiative to move troops and generals. Not to mention that, he had come to visit the navy tonight, and he didn't even give a greeting? Did he really think that the great Dechu couldn't accomplish great things without one Ko Jianghuai? The scene that followed made the navy commanders on the ship even angrier. Ko Jianghuai did not board the ship to greet the commander of Dechu's 3 armies, Chao Changqing. Instead, he stood at the bow of the small boat with his hand on his sword. He raised his head to look at the green-robed man. After directly calling his name, he asked in a low voice, "Chao Changqing, why won't you allow me to take down the 6,000 soldiers that Song Li dropped into my pocket?" The white-haired Chao Changqing did not make a sound and met the young man's gaze. The tall Ko Jianghuai had no awareness that he was talking to Dechu's second stabilizing needle after Yi Baikue. His tone was angry and dissatisfied, almost questioning. The opportunity is fleeting. Song Li is not an idiot who doesn't understand military matters. Wait until he has a firm foothold on the Eastern Front and straightens out the internal conflict in the spring snow building before I want to do it in one go. Ko Jianghuai, you are already General Ko. As for the imperial edict to remove you from your position, you will receive it a few days later. However, it is all the same whether it is early or late. Chao Changqing. I, Ko Jianghuai, originally thought that Dechu still had 2.5 people who knew how to use troops and enough to conquer the world. Since there is only half left tonight, then there is no hope of reviving the country. It doesn't matter if I am an official or not. I want to open my eyes and see if that half can help you take down the spring snow building. Ko Jianghuai angrily threw his sword into the Guangling River. The small boat turned around and left. Song Yuanhang quietly asked, "Minister, has this kid lost his mind?" Chao Changqing smiled slightly. He has not gone mad. Ko Jianghuai is very clear-headed. His view of the Eastern Front is correct. This, however, what Ko Jianghuai does not know is that he has been blinded by a single leaf. Minister, why do you say this? The main general of the Eastern Front that I, Chao Changqing, want should not only focus on the spring snow building and Zhao Yi. If he stops here, then Xie Shibian will be able to achieve his so-called half a person. The blue-clothed official lowered his head and looked at the Guangling River flowing east. He was in a daze. Ko Jianghuai should be able to see further. He should be looking at the Great Peace City. Chapter 1289. In the prince's mansion in Xiangfan City, the young king of Jing and Zhao Sun was summoned to Guangling to quell the rebellion. So far, he had not made any contributions. The large Qingzhou was handed over to a blind man who was also young. It was peaceful. He did not make any outstanding achievements, but he did not degenerate to the point where he had to use self-deprecating methods to win the trust of the new king of Jing'an. It could be said to be a model example of a ruler and his minister being compatible. It was somewhat similar to the partnership between the king of Yan and Nalan Yusi. After nightfall, the stars twinkled. Lu Xuan stood under the eaves and raised his head to look at the resplendent starry sky. Next to him was the maidservant that Prince Jing'an's estate had placed at his side. He never thought that after spending so much time together, they would end up in the same boat. But this might not necessarily be the young Prince Jing'an's original scheme. Teacher, you asked the prince to only lose and not win. When the time comes and the Zhao family loses face, the emperor will most likely blame you, right? Of course he will, and it will be a heavy punishment. Then why did the prince agree? When the old and the new take over, the new emperor will bring in new officials. The close and distant relationships of the past will be overturned. Often, it is not about contributions, only loyalty. It is about enough to use a few thousand lives in Qingzhou to show loyalty. When the old emperor deliberately suppresses someone, it is to pave the way for the new emperor to use. Otherwise, who will remember the good of the new emperor? Most of the wise emperors who retired from the stage in history liked to do things in such an obscure way because they were worried that the new emperor would have no one to use. Also, chaos is inevitable. After His Royal Highness loses this time, other than expressing his stance with the emperor and the crown prince, he can also take the opportunity to remove himself from the chaotic world and observe the changes quietly. Teacher, do you count as a scholar who knows everything in the world without going out? I, as a teacher, am still lacking compared to Mr. Yuan of Great Peace City and Mr. Nalan of the King of Yen. Teacher, you are too modest. Blind Lu Su smiled but did not speak. Teacher, tell me some more principles. Although I don't understand, I like to hear them. How can there be so many principles? I am just full of complaints. Teacher, don't be angry when I say this. If one day Wang Ye uses me to threaten Mr. can rest assured. Isn't it difficult to use a dead person to threaten a living person? Don't do anything stupid. If you kill yourself, with Zhao Sun's personality, I won't be far from death either. Otherwise, he won't be able to sleep well with a so-called confidant that he can't control. Sir, are you helping me find a lame excuse to live? You're not stupid. But to be honest, this reason is not lame. Sir, you're a good man. Are you tired of living like this? What's so tiring about it? At the very least, it's easier than cheating people by gambling in Yongzi Alley a few years ago. Sir, I think you have great wisdom. But I can't tell whether you're wearing new clothes or old ones. I'll know if I touch it, after taking it off. See no evil, sir, don't you like to say that you're blind? Lu Su suddenly laughed. Then he said softly, Zhao Sun, Huainanzi, is called a beautiful jade, but if you break it down, isn't it a Sun emperor? Lu Su sighed. The backbone of us scholars will be broken in a few days. It was the same night, but far away at the border. Along with the sound of horse hooves in the distance, Jizhou's wild goose castle, which was not inferior to a border town, was like a giant beast that had been awakened. Almost instantly, countless lanterns and torches lit up at the same time, illuminating the castle as bright as day. There was a moat outside Wild Goose Castle. As the city gate was opened, the bridge was slowly lowered. The 7 or 8 riders did not need to wait for a moment before they rode their horses onto the bridge and entered Wild Goose Castle. Inside the city gate, a large group of Li family members were kneeling in Wild Goose Castle. There was the reclusive old castle master Li Chulin, the eldest son Li Yuanya who had specially rushed home from Jishi, and a group of elders who were rarely seen. No one was absent. Other than Li Huoli, the eldest son Li Huoli who had suddenly died after traveling south to Jiangnan, the entire Li family, who was like a local tyrant in Jizhou, was present. Even the old castle master's 80th birthday 2 years ago was not as grand as this. The leader of the 7 or 8 riders had an unfamiliar face. His face was pale, and he looked like he could not stand the extreme cold of the winter in the north. He wore a thick fox fur coat from Liaodong. Probably because he was old, He had already nurtured his loftiness to be very restrained and did not give off an overbearing feeling. Other than the father and son pair, Li Chulin and Li Yuanya, no one in Wild Goose Castle knew the identity of this graceful man. However, with the help of the brilliant lights in the corner of their eyes, the others could still see some clues. The rider behind the man who was acting as an attendant was actually the only great pillar of Liang, General Gu Genting. The members of the Li family kneeling on the ground, other than the ignorant teenagers and ignorant children, all guessed the identity of this man. For a moment, their eyes were filled with awe, anxiety, and pride. What a great honor it was to have such a distinguished guest visit them. How glorious was it to bring glory to their family. Perhaps because Gu Jiantang had reminded them before, Li Chulin and Li Yuanya only knelt to welcome him and did not greet him superfluously. The man dismounted from his horse and smiled warmly. The north is cold and the land is cold. Besides, the records of rights of the king states that 80 strokes of the rod should be used in court. Old castle master, please rise. Everyone else, don't kneel. The 6 riders behind him dismounted at the same time. General Gu Jiantang, who was in light armor and carrying a saber, stepped forward silently and helped the man lead his horse. Li Chulin stood up carefully. Every wrinkle and crevice on his haggard and dignified face seemed to emit a strange brilliance. The old man, who was particularly tall, still bent slightly after getting up. He probably did not dare to let the man 5 steps away raise his head and speak. In terms of physical condition, Li Chulin, who was 80 years old but was still strong, looked more like a young man than the man in front of him. At least, Li Chulin gave others the impression that his heroic spirit had not diminished in the past. On the other hand, the guest who visited Wild Goose Castle in the middle of the night seemed to be unable to hide his exhaustion. Especially with the invisible contrast of the martial arts grandmaster Gu Jiantang, he seemed to be even more lethargic. Chapter 1290. As the man moved forward, the group started to break apart. At the same time, there was a suspicion that they were trying to steal the show. The man in the fur coat walked at the very front and called for the old castle master, Li Chulin, to accompany him. Gu Jiantang held a horse in each hand and followed closely behind. Then came Li Yuanya. These 4 people slowly walked at the front. Then came the 5 riders who each held heavy military power on the northern border of the dynasty. Finally came the old and young members of the Li family. Because the sight of the 5 people holding the horses was blocked, the Li family members who couldn't go to Gudezhugu's side to see what was going on started to look at the backs of these people. The old man with the sharp eyes of Yanbao recognized most of them and guessed the rest. He couldn't help but be speechless. These 5 people were all important figures in the military who held the title of general with real power. The lowest official was rank 4. It could be said that if these 5 people died at Yanbao, then the northern border of the 2 liaos would be half paralyzed. However, with Gu Jiantang, who was the number 1 blade user in the world, holding the line, it would be difficult for these 5 generals to die even if they wanted to. Other than having high positions and power, these 5 riders had one thing in common. Compared to the old generals like Yang Xinxing and Yan Jinchuan, although their military achievements and fame were not as great, they won because they were young. The oldest was less than 50 years old and the youngest was only 30 years old. The battlefield at the border didn't care about age and experience more than the court. Therefore, it could be said that these 5 were destined to become the future military pillars of the Liyang imperial court. Perhaps the next minister of war of Great Peace City would emerge from among them. The man walked on the smooth road paved with large green stone slabs. He raised his head and looked at the numerous fire dragons that stretched up from the lanterns. He sighed softly and said, "This is the first time I have entered Ji province in my life. I should have come earlier. My Zhao family is about to conquer the world. Usually, when I go to the diligent room to teach the Zhao family members, I always say that we can't slack off. We can't be misled by the ancients and believe that after conquering the world, we have to dismount from the horse and protect the world. That's what I said, but I don't seem to have done a good job of teaching them by word and example. Presumably, some of the Zhao clan's descendants will find it harder to place as much importance on military affairs as their ancestors." No matter how brave the old fox Li Chulin was, He didn't dare to interrupt the son of heaven's family affairs. He could only perk up his ears and not miss a single word. As long as the emperor, who was traveling incognito, didn't ask questions, he would just listen and not speak. This man who could allow Gu Jiantang to lead his horse and guard him with a clear conscience was none other than the current emperor, Zhao Dun, who had stealthily arrived at the border. However, the emperor did not issue an edict for the crown prince to be regent as soon as he left the capital. Instead, when he was about to return from Jizhou, he had the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, Song Tonglu, hand a secret edict to Bai Guo of the Ministry of Rites and make it public. The edict was ambiguous, and it was enough for the purple-cloaked officials in the officialdom to chew on. This was the first time the old man had seen the emperor with his own eyes, and his heart palpitated violently. That year, the execution of the entire Han family had caused turmoil in Jizhou. The Li family of Yanbao, who had a marriage alliance with the Han family, had also been implicated. At that time, Li Chulin, who had yet to vacate the position of family head for Li Yuan'e, was extremely vicious and merciless. Not only did he tie up the young couple and bring them to the execution ground in Jizhou's capital, he didn't even spare their young children. In the end, the two children, who should have been surnamed Li, were beheaded along with their parents. Thinking about it now, although Li Chulin felt somewhat guilty, he didn't regret it in the slightest. Under the strife of the general situation, the lives of a few innocent people didn't count for much. In just one night, the Han family, who had been loyal for hundreds of years, had become a traitor who had betrayed the country. For the past 10 years, everyone in the imperial court had said that it was the blue-eyed grand secretary who had harmed the public interest. It had even turned into one of the most powerful crimes that the imperial censorate had used to impeach Zhang Julu. This made the old man, who liked to read history in his spare time, feel somewhat distressed. In the past dynasties, there had always been treacherous officials who manipulated power and deceived the public. In the end, they were executed under the law, and never dared to say how muddle-headed the emperor was. To be honest, Li Chulin admired the grand secretary who was in the center of the imperial court but kept himself clean in all aspects. If it weren't for Zhang Julu's insistence on supporting the northern border and using half of the imperial court's taxes to support the northern border, the old minister of war behind him wouldn't have been able to handle the situation so easily. As for why the current emperor had to make such an unnecessary move to visit Yanbao, after Li Chulin received Gu Jiantang's handwritten secret letter, he had a private meeting with his eldest son, Li Yuan'e. There were only 3 answers he came up with. Firstly, the imperial court of Zhao, or rather, the emperor, had to provide evidence that could convince the public in Ji province in order to redress the Han family's innocence. Yanbao was an old and wealthy family that had been rooted in Ji province for generations, and was also one of the victims in the past. If the Li family stood out and spoke at this critical moment, it would be more ironed out than the impeachment of the Right Chancellor of the Imperial College. It would also win more sympathy from the imperial court. It was an irresistible trend for everyone to push the wall that was down. However, not everyone had the right to push the high wall of the Zhang family that had stood in the imperial court for over 20 years. Furthermore, the Yuzhou side was restless. Currently, there were some extreme actions that crossed the border. Tens of thousands of riders had entered Ji province. Naturally, the imperial court would have to guard against the young man from Bailiang's Su family. With the departure of the old general of Ji province, Yang Shenxing, the Li family of Yanbao, who had 7,000 to 8,000 private soldiers, would naturally fall into the eyes of the imperial court. Both father and son guessed that it was a personal matter of the emperor. After the previous 2 times where he personally led the troops and returned with no results, the current emperor had never patrolled the borders. He had not even gone to the prosperous Jiangnan. The people mistakenly thought that the current emperor only cared about internal affairs and did not care about military exploits on the borders. This was definitely the view of a country bumpkin. Li Chulin had always believed that the current emperor had an extremely strong desire to conquer Beimang, because this was the only feat that could prove that he could stand shoulder to shoulder with the late emperor. Emperor Zhao Dun gradually ascended along the green stone path. Yanbao's path also had the reputation of being the path of blue clouds. All the officials of Ji province would take this path in hopes of good luck. However, to the person sitting on the dragon chair, the meteoric rise that the officials dreamed of was not even worth mentioning. Li Chulin was shocked. It was said that the emperor did not forget to train his body in addition to working hard. The people of Ji province all thought that this man, who was only 50 years old, could continue to sit on that chair and look south for another 10 to 20 years. How could his physical strength be so weak? He actually had to pant after every 100 steps? Could it be that the prosperous Li Yang was about to change? It had to be known that Li Yang could not be considered peaceful. There were internal and external troubles. Outside, there was Beimang's million-strong cavalry eyeing them covetously. Inside, there was the revival of West Chu. Even more inside, the imperial court was in a state of crisis. Everyone was in danger. If something were to happen at this time, Li Chulin did not dare to think any further. He was afraid that the emperor beside him would notice if he revealed even the slightest abnormality. Yanbao was like a mountain. It went up layer by layer and climbed steadily. His Majesty stopped to rest at a pavilion with a wide view halfway up the mountain. He reached out and tightened his grip on the thick fur coat. After a long silence, he glanced to the west and suddenly said, "Old castle master, you must have a plan to deal with my uninvited visit. However, you are probably overthinking and wrong. I might as well tell you the truth. The reason I came to Yanbao was to take a closer look at that place." The old fort master of Yanbao Castle seemed to be shocked. He subconsciously straightened his back and then quickly bent down heavily. The old man, who was used to the ups and downs of life, trembled in fear and did not dare to speak. The emperor waved his hand. Gu Jiantang walked forward a few steps. Li Chulin tactfully retreated and waited at the bottom of the steps. The emperor coughed a few times. His tone was somewhat difficult. "Jiantang, I have changed my mind. Follow me back to the capital tomorrow. When the time comes, you will send him off. Since I do not dare to see him, and none of the civil officials in the imperial court are worthy, I have thought about it. Only you, a general with the title of Pillar of the State, are worthy. I actually know a little about the thoughts he has buried deep in his heart." Gu Jiantang said calmly, "Does your Majesty have any words to pass on?" The emperor hesitated and said self-deprecatingly, "Just tell him that the Dun, in Zhao Dun's name, is worthy of the world. Only he, Zhang Zhu, is ashamed." Chapter 1291. The arrival of the Emperor Zhao Dun and the Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan took advantage of the situation to govern the country. The Li Yang court did not become turbulent because of this. On the contrary, under the direction of the Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan, as well as the strong support of the Crown Prince Yin Maochun and the other Eternal Hui Spring officials, the court even showed signs of greater vitality than before. Zhao Zhuan showed the same diligence as the current emperor. He never missed court meetings, sat through the night, and frequently summoned his officials. The Crown Prince did not disappoint and showed the presence of a wise ruler. Imperceptibly, the heavy haze that covered Great Peace City at the end of the first year of auspicious talisman faded slightly. Under Zhao Zhuan's management, a series of dazzling and far-reaching changes in power unfolded in the center of the dynasty. Qi Yanglong, as everyone expected, became the head of the secretariat, which had always been empty, and became an extremely rare prime minister in Li Yang's history. Together with Zhang Julu, the leader of the secretariat, he was called the Grand Secretary by the people of the capital. Wang Xianxia, who had always been a tiring official in the capital and had been promoted to Minister of Revenue, was sent out to become the Guangling Daoist administrator. At the same time, Zhao Yuling, who was also from the Yonghui era, resigned as the Minister of Personnel and was promoted by half a rank, entering the Secretariat to assist the old head of the Secretariat Qi Yanglong. Yin Maochun, the head of the Hanlin Academy, who had always been known as the Crown Prince but was actually only a rank 3 official, finally took a substantial step forward. Not only was he given the title of Grand Secretary of the Hall of Harmony, ranked second out of the 6 Grand Secretaries of Liang, he also took over as Minister of Personnel. With the Beijing investigation and local reviews as a foundation, the Liyang court was not surprised by this move. Baigua, the Minister of Rights, filled the vacancy left by Wang Xionggui's departure, moving from the Ministry of Rights to the Ministry of Revenue. Although their ranks were the same, one was the Minister of Rights of the Yamen, and the other was the Ministry of Revenue that was in charge of land taxes. Everyone could see that Bai Guo had also stepped onto a new level and did not fall too far behind Zhao Yuling and Yin Maochen. As for the Right Chancellor of the Imperial College, Jin Lanting, who had a public conflict with Yao Baifeng, he became the luckiest person in the Liang dynasty in the past 5 years. After the left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights was promoted to minister, Jin Lanting, who had been on the cusp of Great Peace City for the past few years, once again gave everyone a huge surprise. He was promoted to secondary grade 2 left assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. The left chancellor, Yao Baifeng, who was supposed to be in charge of the Ministry of Rights, became the unexpected person. The commander at the front, Lu Shengxiang, who did not know how to use troops and caused problems in the rebellion, was promoted instead of being demoted. Although he resigned from his position as the left assistant minister of the Ministry of War, he was promoted instead. Although he resigned from his position as the left assistant minister of the Ministry of War, he received the title of primary grade 2 general. The dragon general, Su Gong, who was seen as having the potential to lead troops down south, was not only unable to replace Lu Shengxiang, who was widely acknowledged to be mediocre, but this pillar of the Su family was instead hidden as the left assistant minister of the Ministry of War. After taking the position, it was rumored that he was going to be chased out of Great Peace City to patrol the northern border. It was hard to imagine that such a grand storm had nothing to do with that purple-bearded, blue-eyed man from beginning to end. Last year, during the inspection, Zhao Yuling and Yin Maochen submitted to the emperor matters regarding the promotion and reprimand of the 1,800 officials in the capital. This year was the external inspection, which was also the year of the local evaluation. After Yin Maochen returned to the capital a while ago, he quickly ran into the emperor on his border patrol. Thus, under an imperial edict from Liaoxi to the capital, the details of the local evaluation were sent to the crown prince. Zhao Zhuan was given full authority over this matter. After the morning court session, the crown prince had Song Tonglu, head of the ceremony directorate, pass on a message to all of the grand secretaries of the palace, the big shots of the 2 provinces under the Hall of Secretaries, the assistant ministers of the 6 ministries, and a number of dukes and marquises surnamed Zhao to participate in this impromptu afternoon court session, which could be considered a common occurrence in Liyang Imperial Court. In the meeting room, the 3 officials of the Ministry of Personnel, the Ministry of Personnel's Merit Auditing Department, the Ministry of Appointment Examination Department, and the newly appointed Merit Auditing Department were responsible for reporting the specific situation. The Crown Prince and the 20 or so most powerful dukes and marquises in the Liang dynasty passed around the files one after another. There were also several eunuchs, including the ceremony directorate, who were present to listen. These eunuchs, who wore bright red python robes, were mainly responsible for adding charcoal and changing the refreshments. Grand Secretary Zhang Julu was invited, but did not attend. In the warm room, there were not many new faces, but many of the old faces had changed into brand new official robes and court robes. It was not the new year, but there was already a new atmosphere. The former Minister of Personnel, Zhao Yuling, was already one of the few first-rank officials. Today, he sat beside the head of the Hall of Secretaries, Qianglong. Intentionally or unintentionally, he glanced at Yin Maochen, who was also of Zhonglu origin. When he lowered his head and leisurely drank his tea, the corners of his mouth quietly curved up. A certain someone had been called the Prime Minister for more than 10 years. Today, he was only the Minister of Personnel of the External Court, nothing more than eating the leftovers from his own leftovers. The dust had more or less settled, but didn't he still not lose the title of Prime Minister? When would he be able to take on the role of Prime Minister in reality? In the spring of Eternal Hui, it was publicly acknowledged that Bai Guo was the most talented, but Yin Maochen was the most suitable. However, I, Zhao Yuling, am now a step ahead of him. The so-called Grand Secretary of the Palace of Harmony that Yin Maochen has is nothing more than the Emperor's alms to compensate you for not being able to become the head of the Palace of Secretaries. Chapter 1292. In truth, half a month ago, Zhao Yuling had been secretly worried. He was not afraid that Yin Maochen, who had been dormant for many years, would amaze the world with a single brilliant feat. What he was afraid of was that Yin Maochun would continue to be suppressed in the Hanlin Academy. This meant that once someone completely fell from power, Yin Maochun would be destined to be the one with the greatest benefits. Now that the court had given him the Minister of Appointments and the Grand Secretary, Zhao Yuling, who was familiar with the thoughts of the emperor, could be at ease. Slightly moistening his throat, Zhao Yuling, who was in a good mood, twisted the lid of his teacup. Out of the corner of his eye, he casually sized up the new Minister of Revenue, Baigua. He had never seen this disappointing fellow as an enemy. Even though Baigua had a good reputation in the court, once one had climbed to their level, they only paid attention to 4 words: simplicity in the heart of the emperor. As expected, Baigua had not been able to enter Tantanan's subordinate province, and he had not been able to obtain the position of First Minister of the 6 ministries. In the end, in this room, the most disappointed person was Yin Maochun. The second most disappointed person was our new Minister of Revenue. However, in Zhao Yuling's view, Baigua, who did not have much of a foundation, should be satisfied to be able to obtain the position of Minister of Revenue. Zhao Yuling raised his eyelids and just happened to see the bearded young third minister Jin looking over. Zhao Yuling's face was expressionless. The newly appointed left assistant minister of rights, Jin Lanting, hurriedly smiled in greeting. Zhao Yuling did not pay him any attention. He turned around and put down his teacup, laughing coldly in his heart. Did a lucky fellow, who had relied on crooked methods to barely make it to the center of the dynasty, really think he could last forever? In the court, one was not afraid of the battles between gentlemen, or even between factions. However, the greatest taboo was to make enemies everywhere because of personal grudges. Coming from a small, unknown noble family in Beiliang, in just a few short years, he had angered Huan Wen and Yao Baifeng. Even if he managed to use his influence to take down someone, could he, Jin Lanting, clean up the mess afterwards? Other than Jin Lanting, who was attending such a high-level court meeting for the first time, there was another official who was even more unfamiliar to Great Peace City than Jin Lanting. That was Su Gong of the Gumu family of Gangnam-do. As the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, he was still a famous general even though he had missed the Spring and Autumn War. At this moment, he was sitting upright beside his superior, Liu Baijia. His eyes were focused on his nose was focused on his heart, and his expression was firm and rigid. Compared to the elegant bearing of the Tangxi sword Immortal Lu Shangshu, Su Gong was more like a military general on the battlefield. His body was tall and sturdy, and his appearance was rough. His ascension this time was the most confusing of all the officials who had changed positions. Logically speaking, Su Gong did not have any great achievements, nor was he Gu Jiantong's direct line of command. He did not have any big tree in the court that he could rely on, so he should not have been included in the Jingdo court. But this time, he had suddenly appeared out of nowhere and then was quickly expelled from the capital. This made Su Gong seem even more like a joke. The court meeting only came to an end at dusk. The Minister of Works and the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, both in their 60s, could not hide their fatigue. Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan ordered the ceremony directorate to have the imperial kitchen send over some food. During this time, all the officials could find time to rest or walk out of their rooms to get some air. Huan Wen was an important official with sufficient experience, reputation, and achievements. Naturally, he would not be as reserved and uneasy as the assistant ministers of the 6 ministries. He was the first to leave the room. Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan quickly rose and walked out quickly. He called out to Tantanan with a smile, and then they walked out together. This scene, in the eyes of those who paid attention, could not help but cause their imaginations to run wild. Jin Lanting sat in his seat without moving. He also did not take the initiative to exchange pleasantries with any of the seniors in the room. He seemed particularly lonely. In the corridor outside the room, Huan Wen smiled and asked, "What matter does your highness have?" There was no one around. The crown prince blinked and secretly made a gesture of raising his cup to drink. Huan Wen was not polite. He chuckled and said, "That would be great." The two of them walked to a distant side room. Behind them was the head eunuch of the ceremony directorate, Song Tongl. The crown prince hesitated and then said, The position of the Right Chancellor of the Imperial College is temporarily vacant. Master Yao has not recommended anyone for the position. Does Tantanon have any suggestions? Huan Wen was stunned. Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan smiled and did not speak. Huan Wen also smiled and did not hesitate. He said straightforwardly, "There is no candidate for the Right Chancellor of the Imperial College. The province under my tutelage is lacking a satisfactory assistant official. Coincidentally, I can take this opportunity to ask for someone from Your Highness." Zhao Zhuan furrowed his brows and asked quietly, "Could it be?" Although the Crown Prince did not say a name, Tantanon had already nodded. Both sides were well aware. It was Qin Xiaobao, Qin Wang of the Diligent Department. He was born a poor scholar and had achieved jinshi. He did not make it into the top 3, but he was barely qualified to enter the Hanlin Academy and become a noble servant. He then served as the personal attendant of the Son of Heaven. Later, he was briefly a lecturer in the Eastern Palace and a doctor in the Meritorious Service Department. Noble was noble, but his official position was not high. Junior Guardian could only be considered a title bestowed by the Son of Heaven. But if Chen Wang could go to the Minxia province and become Huan Wen's right-hand man, then it would not make sense if he did not have a high third-rank official. It was even possible for him to be a second-rank official. In this way, the popular Jean Lanting in Great Pea City would pale in comparison. Huan Wen suddenly slapped his head and said, "The candidate for the Right Chancellor of the Imperial College, I have thought of a very unsuitable candidate." The Crown Prince couldn't help but smile. He said helplessly, "Tantanon, your words?" Huan Wen laughed loudly and didn't say anything else. But once again, both sides were well aware that the 2 official positions had been decided before the wine was even drunk. One was Qin Wang, going to the Minxia province. The other was Sun Yin, going to the Imperial College. They both seemed to come from Beiliang. Chapter 1293. In the past, the Liang dynasty, which had been belittled as the Northern Barbarians, was not like West Chu, which had flourished in its literary style. It had never had the position of Grand Tutor or Grand Tutor. After unifying the Central Plains, it was still like this. Furthermore, to prevent the officials from monopolizing power, even the 2 provinces under the Hall of Secretaries were empty. Until recently, Huan Wen and Qi Yanglong broke the old rule. The Diligent Room was the study place for the sons and grandsons of the Emperor and the sons and grandsons of the Emperor and the Marquis. The teachers who gave lectures here were all virtuous scholars with both ability and political integrity. It's just that their official rank was not high, so much so that some of the famous scholars who were of the same rank were barely qualified. Even the head of the Diligent Room, Chen Wang, only had the title of Junior Protector above his head. His actual salary was even lower than that of a normal servant of the Hanlin Academy. Thus, when Chen Wang appeared out of nowhere and took over the position of Junior Protector of the Diligent Room, in City only thought that a little Prime Minister, second to Yin Maochun, had appeared. He would have to train step by step for a decade or 2 before he could truly enter the center of power. However, a rumbling rumor quickly spread. Not only did this person have to immediately rush to the Minxia province to take up an important position, he might even steal food from the tiger's mouth from Yin Maochun, who had controlled the Hanlin Academy for decades. As if to prove this rumor that came from an unknown mansion in the capital, Tantanon and the Imperial College's left chancellor, Yao Baifeng, visited Qin Xiaobao together. It was said that they had a good chat and became friends despite the difference in age. Looking back at Third Minister Jin, compared to the previously unknown Chen Wang, although he was riding on the crest of success, he had never received such special treatment among the top officials of the dynasty. From this, it could be seen that Chen Wang's ability to raise Wang was far more natural and smooth than Jean Lanting. In a moment, Wang County Street in City was filled with nobles and relatives of the emperor. This originally inconspicuous little county manor was suddenly filled with people and carriages. The grandfather of Chen Wang's wife was not from the legitimate line of the previous emperor. He was a lowly person and his words carried little weight. However, during the Spring and Autumn War, he stood firmly behind the previous emperor and waved the flag and shouted for him. The eldest son of the first wife could inherit the title of Commandery Prince of Chai. Chen Wang's wife, as the daughter of the Commandery Prince of Chai, should have been demoted to a county princess. However, the emperor remembered the loyalty of the 2 generations of Chai commandery princes and made an exception and arranged for her to marry Chen Wang. Now, it was not only Chen Wang, but the commandery prince of Chai commandery prince's skills of Chai commandery prince. Chen Wang and the commandery princess had already moved out of the prince's mansion. Their new mansion was not far from each other. If his wife wanted to go back to her parents' home, it would only take the time to drink a cup of tea. At first, Prince Chai was afraid that his daughter's frequent visits would make Chen Wang unhappy. However, as time went by, he discovered that his virtuous son-in-law's breadth of mind was indeed extraordinary. Now that Chen Wang was the junior guardian and was about to enter the Minxia province, which was gradually becoming more and more powerful, he did not have the slightest bit of arrogance that was common among the children of poor families. Because the Chen mansion was closed to visitors all year round and did not see any strangers, this was an iron rule set by Chen Wang before he became famous. Many opportunists who wanted to warm up the stove had to take a step back and go to the junior guardian's father-in-law's mansion with gifts. This made Commandery Prince Chai, who had the nickname of Cold Bench Commandery Prince, feel proud. The Commandery Prince Chai, who was slightly older, would visit his neighbors on the street with his hands behind his back. The grievances of the first half of his life were probably swept away. Great Peace City welcomed its second snowfall. Before the old snow had completely melted, new snow was piled up. The more tired and lazy families didn't even bother to sweep the snow. The elders who were familiar with the solar terms muttered that before the year was over, there might have been a snowy scene to enjoy. It was just that the winter cold was bone-chilling, making it hard for these old bones with 1 foot in the grave. However, other than sighing, the elders would often gather their friends around the stove and chat. The common people of the capital under the sun of heaven liked to point out the country. This was especially the case for these old fellows who had experienced 2 or even 3 dynasties of Emperor Liang. Even though they were not happy about the rising smoke of the northwest frontier fortress and the ending of the Guangling battle, they were still generally optimistic. After all, the current dynasty had gone through more than 20 years of cultivation and recuperation. Liang also had the solid foundation of the eternal Hui Spring. The old people of the capital who were accustomed to wind and rain believed that by this time next year, the world would be completely at peace. Some of the elders would even think that if they could see the scene of the current dynasty swallowing up Beimang before they lay in their coffins, then they could die without regrets. This place in Great Peace City that the common people called Junwang Alley vaguely seemed to be in a confrontation with the street where Grand Secretary Zhang's residence was located. Only, the situations of the 2 sides were completely opposite. The latter, whenever it was time for morning court and after court, would always be full of people and carriages, while the former streets were rarely seen. It was because even though the people in the former's residences all had top-notch statuses, apart from an extremely small number of people who could participate in court politics, most of them were pretty to look at but useless embroidered pillows. Ever since Eternal Hui, they had always been excluded from the center of the imperial court by a certain purple-bearded and blue-eyed individual. As a result, when they made that trip back and forth every morning and evening, they could only be pushed out as decorations during the few imperial court ceremonies that could be counted on one's fingers. The latter streets were incomparably noisy, everyone dressed in purple-scarlet official robes. However, ever since autumn of the first year of Xiangfu, the carriages in the always lifeless Junwang Alley gradually became more frequent. This place that was originally used to standing on its own mountain began to accept many new faces. Under the twilight, the young master of the Chen Manor that was previously considered to be at the bottom of Junwang Alley took the initiative to bring an unfamiliar guest home. The manor's gatekeeper was an elder who had served the old Junwang Manor for generations, but he still couldn't recognize who this middle-aged man who was still dressed in court clothes was, to actually be able to make the master treat him so seriously. Looking at that person's official patch, it was clearly a brocade-embroidered third-grade peacock. The elder believed his eyesight was still quite sharp. Whether or not he was an aristocratic family's descendant, the old gatekeeper had confidence that he would be able to recognize him with a single glance. He carefully sized up this fella who crossed the threshold with his master, always feeling like this person's aura was a bit contradictory. He was clearly a civil official, yet he seemed like a military general who had just walked out of the battlefield, yet he also didn't seem like those crude people who often entered and left the Ministry of War's Gu hut and made a fool of themselves. The number of servants in the manor was just enough to ensure that the 4 courtyards of the manor could operate without hindrance. Thus, when Chen Wang and his guest entered the manor and walked all the way to the study, they didn't encounter anyone. Not to mention the luxurious mansions built according to the standards of a prince, even the nearby Junwang mansions that had 3 roads and 5 courtyards, according to the ancestral system, were all bustling with people coming and going at this banquet. In the heavy snow, there was no reason to hold a bowl of wine, invite 1 or 2 close friends, and have a high status to talk to one's heart's content. On the contrary, this Chen manor, which paled in comparison in terms of size, had the richest courtyard with a profound artistic conception. After the host and guests sat down, a tall woman of middle age rushed over when she heard the news. When she entered the room, her husband was personally brewing tea. The flame in the stove flickered slightly, and the pot of water gradually boiled, adding some warmth to the slightly cold room. Chen Wang raised his head and glanced at his wife. With a smile, he introduced, "This is Assistant Minister Su of the Ministry of War." Regardless of status, there were no ignorant and ill-informed people in Junwang Alley. The woman who had been conferred the title of Princess Changel immediately knew of the multiple identities of the visitor. General of the Dragon, Su Gong, the pillar of support of the Gumasu family, and a young and strong general whose prestige ranked among the best in the Liang army. Presently, he was ridiculed by everyone in Junwang Alley as the new wife of Great Peace City. She had also heard that this assistant minister Su was not very well liked. Although it could not be considered a public promotion or a hidden demotion, it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens for him to successfully integrate into the capital's court as quickly as the Tangxi sword immortal, Lu Baijie. The woman, whose real name was Zhao Song, had never been interested in court politics. As usual, she did not think deeply about why her husband had brought this assistant minister of the Ministry of War home. The visitor was a guest, so she naturally knew how to respond. She could not lose face for her husband. Thus, after a tepid greeting to Su Gong, she hurriedly took over Chen Wang's task of brewing tea. After pouring 2 cups of tea for the 2 men, she immediately bid farewell and left. Su Gong joked, "Junior Guardian has good fortune. We really can't be envious." Su Gong had always been a proper local official. He had never purposely built any connections in Great Peace City, where it was easier to become an official if one had connections in court. Just as the rumors said, he was able to enter the capital this time because he had relied on the elders of his clan and a number of seniors in Gangnam-do to sell their old faces, to beg for this position. His path in the future was really up to the teacher to lead the way, and cultivation depended on the individual. Thus, after he entered the capital, he was extremely restrained and reserved. He almost never left his home. The reason he was able to get in touch with Chen Wang was because Chen Wang had once interacted with Su Gong when he was assisting Yin Maochun in the great plan of conducting the local examinations. They were friends and regretted not having met earlier. At the time, Su Gong could never have imagined that Chen Wang would rise so quickly and become one of the important officials in the center of the dynasty. Chen Wang was not too humble. He nodded and smiled. "My wife's personality is one of the better ones among the many golden branches of the Zhao family." Chen Wang paused for a moment. His expression was gentle as he subconsciously added, "I cherish it." Su Gong hesitated for a moment and then asked, "Forgive me for asking, but although my clan has hoped for many years that I would one day enter the Ministry of Military Personnel, for some reason, the elders in my clan were very surprised that I was summoned to the capital this time. In particular, Elder, you gave me the words half fortune and half misfortune." In his words, there was an inexplicable sorrow about the unpredictability of the world. It is clear that Gangnam-do hopes that I, Su Gong, can enter the capital, but whether or not I can enter the capital is not something they can control. "Junior Guardian, did anyone in the capital put in a good word for me? If one could speak, they would speak." This was the friendship of a gentleman. Su Gong knew that his direct question was not in accordance with the rules of an official, but he believed that he was sincere in his friendship with Chen Wang and did not bother to hide it. Chen Wang smiled and pointed at himself. Su Gong was stunned. Chapter 1294. Chen Wang straightened his expression and said, "When the Yu family first entered the capital, there was no doubt that they had the intention of introducing brothers Su to the capital. They also had some plans. For some reason, they did not follow up. In my view, at the last moment, they felt that brothers Su should not come to Great Peace City for now. At the time, I had not entered the diligent department as junior protector and was still sitting in the position of merit examiner of the Ministry of Appointments. I was in my position and said some things to His Highness the Crown Prince. Of course, that was just icing on the cake. If not for Brother Su's own abilities, allowing me to exaggerate, His Highness the Crown Prince would not have any ideas." Su Gong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Chen Wang said honestly, "Yu Jiankong of Shang Pillar State has his considerations, and I have my own thoughts. The situation is unstable, and I feel that with Brother Su's talent, if not now, when will you come out? Does Brother Su want to miss the spring and autumn war again after missing it once? Let me ask, how many more 20 years and opportunities do Brother Su have to miss? Of course, I also understand Shang Pillar State's cautiousness. They treat Brother Su as a rare commodity and wait for the situation to deteriorate further. Maybe at that critical moment, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of War will not be able to send away a hidden dragon general like you." Su Gong nodded and said, "I will listen to Junior Protector's words." Chen Wang smiled and said, "So this time, Brother Su has been forced to patrol the borders and become the laughingstock of Great Peace City. Don't blame me for drawing legs on a snake. How about I use tea in place of wine and punish myself with 3 cups? Su Gong laughed open-mindedly and said, "Brother Chen's words are pretentious." Chen Wang countered, "You called me Junior Protector so many times and only called me Brother Chen. You dare to say I am pretentious? Who is the pretentious one?" Su Gong, who was as tall as a mountain, said shamelessly, "Junior Protector, please forgive me." Chen Wang drank tea. The woman who stood at the door hesitated for a long time but still did not knock. She had turned back to tell her husband that she was going to her maternal home to take some things home. Seeing the warm smile on this man's face, she felt both heartfelt and indescribable guilt. She was happy that her husband was a perfect match that no picky woman could find fault with. She was happy that he finally had a friend whom he could bear heart to drink tea and chat with. As for Princess Changle, she felt guilty that ever since they had been married, she had never known how to share his burdens. Based on her woman's intuition, she could sense his deeply hidden depression. Perhaps it was because being by the Emperor's side for so long was like living with a tiger. Everywhere he went, it was as if he was treading on thin ice. She, as a so-called Golden Branch and Jade Leaf, as well as her father's so-called relatives of the imperial family, had always been a restraint to her man, not a help. Chen Wang never drank. Even on the day of their marriage, he did not overdo it. Every day, he would burn the midnight oil and read. He would sleep much later than she did, but he would wake up much earlier than she did. It was as if he always had endless books to read and endless government affairs to deal with. But what was rare was that he never made her feel left out. Although she was not an intelligent woman with exquisite thoughts, she was not stupid. She believed that he truly cared for her and would not flirt outside. Chen Wang's self-respect was unsurpassed in the dozens of manors in Junwang Alley. He cared about her. She loved him very much, but she did not know what to do for him. In the room, the 2 most talented men of the Liang dynasty were drinking weak tea and talking without restraint. She quietly left. Chen Wang asked Su Gong about the trend of the Guangling Road War. Su Gong was deeply worried, and his tone was somewhat heavy. The Ministry of War's earliest estimate was that they would be able to quell the rebellion in half a year. In fact, it was not completely blind optimism. If Yang Xinxing and Yan Zhenchuan had not won a great victory at the time, as long as they had held on, then West Chu's revival would have been tantamount to a slow suicide. However, the 2 old generals' defeat facilitated the sharpening of West Chu's new blade. This allowed the 2 young geniuses, Xie Shibian and Ko Jianghuai, to have enough leeway to grow from battle to battle. The more they fought, the braver they became. Now that West Chu's wings are growing, it will be very difficult to end the war quickly. In addition, the commander-in-chief, Lu Shengxiang, has always been a figurehead. His true enemies are not only West Chu's rebel army, but also the intrigues of the imperial court and the struggle for power within the army. On the other hand, West Chu's side is united as an impregnable fortress. With one side weakening and one side strengthening, this war will be difficult to fight. Fortunately, the imperial court did not push all the blame onto Lu Shengxiang and did not change the commander-in-chief. Otherwise, Chen Wang nodded and said, "His Highness the Crown Prince said that he has already mentally prepared himself for the remnants of West Chu's army to attack the capital." Su Gong turned pale with fright and hurriedly looked around. Chen Wang said calmly, "Don't worry. Even if these words reach His Highness, nothing will happen to you and I. His Highness still has this bit of magnanimity." Su Gong's emotions were surging. Chen Xiaobao's simple words had revealed too many secrets. On the surface, it was praising Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan for his magnanimity and his negative attitude towards the West Chu war. The deeper meaning was that Chen Wang was sending him a hidden message. His Highness the Crown Prince was a magnanimous heir and worthy of Su Gong's allegiance. If he dug deeper, Su Gong felt a chill run down his spine. The Crown Prince was only supervising the country at a sensitive time. The Emperor was still alive. Was it not too early to persuade or remind an assistant minister of the Ministry of War to take a clear stand? Could it be that there was some kind of mystery behind this? It had to be said that in these years, there had never been any shocking secret information from Great Peace City that the Emperor was unwell. Could it be? Just as Su Gong's mind was in a fierce struggle, Chen Wang seemed to have just said a few casual words and quickly jumped to the next question. Then how long can Bailiang defend? If the northwest gate cannot be defended, how will it be defended next? Su Gong was experienced and ruthless. Chen Wang, who was sitting silently across from him, did not move. His expression did not change at all. He naturally had a plan for this kind of matter. He immediately replied, "Under normal circumstances, the Bailiang frontier army can defend for 2 years, but this is based on the premise that neither side makes any major mistakes or plots. In reality, when two armies are facing each other, you can never guess whether the opponent's next move will be stunning or muddle-headed. There are many classic battles in history that were created by a strange combination of factors. Some made the best of the mistakes, and some made the best of the mistakes. Some people lost mysteriously, and some people won in a strange way. Some people won in a strange way, some people won in a strange way, some people won in a strange way, some people won in a strange way. If it was a normal confrontation between two armies, the leader's ability to use soldiers was mediocre. It was just a competition of the resources of both sides. There was no suspense. But in the Great War of Liangmang, it could not be compared like this because both sides had too many famous generals. Su Gong was slightly fascinated and a dazed look appeared in his eyes. Bailiang had Chu Lushan, Yuan Zhuozong, Yan Wenluan, Chen Yunchue, He Zhonghu. Which one of them was not a general who had been exposed to the smoke of battle and could take charge of an area? Beimeng had Tuoba Bodhisattva, Dong Zhuo, Lu Ge, Huang Songpu Yang Yuanzhen. Su Gong sighed and said, "Almost everyone can cause unpredictable changes to the entire battle situation." Chapter 1295. Su Gong gradually entered a good mood. Once he started talking, he could not stop. He held a cup in one hand but did not drink the tea. He raised the other hand and pointed in the air. Before Bailiang was absorbed into Liang territory, there were two paths for the northern nomads to invade south. One was to use Bailiang, which was at the head of the Central Plains, as the first choice. The army occupied the high ground and was usually unstoppable. The disadvantage was that the battle line was slightly longer. Even if they fought all the way to Xiangfan, which was at the middle of the Central Plains, it would be difficult to advance any further. Often, they could only retreat. The second was to go south through the gaps at the border of Ji province and send cavalry to search in batches to clear out the scattered obstacles outside the pass. On one hand, they would cover the army, and on the other, they would pillage villages and force the Central Plains dynasties to retreat to their strongholds. Right now, the northern Mang seems to have chosen an unwise path, but in fact, Choosing short-term troubles and abandoning long-term considerations is a method they have no other choice. The northern barbarians are determined to attack our dynasty, and there is no better plan to speak of. There are only two options to choose from. The northern Mang can't afford to drag it out, but our dynasty can afford to drag it out. If we wait until the Guangling Path and West Chu are destroyed before the northern Mang starts the war, then we really won't be able to fight. A central plains with a stable interior and a central plains imperial court that was eager to make progress was undoubtedly the nightmare of the nomads in the north. If Beimang attacks their western front first, which is the two Liao defense lines that our court built with half of our dynasty's national strength, outsiders may think that this line is closest to Greaton City and that Beimang should use their troops this way. However, the truth is that Beimang will not be able to go south at that time because Beiliang's 300,000 border army will definitely respond to the two Liao on the eastern front and initiate an attack on Beimang's southern court. Once the Beiliang cavalry wantonly enters the heartland and enters the grasslands, even if the Beimang army is lucky enough to advance all the way to Greaton City, they will not be able to return. Not only will the southern court be gone, but even the northern court will be destroyed. Since Beimang has chosen the stubborn Beiliang as their breakthrough point, let's take a step back and say that if Beimang really manages to defeat Beiliang, it is not yet time to take a breather because there will be two fierce battles soon to be fought. The most fatal thing is that these two battles are happening at the same time. Beimang, whose strength has been greatly damaged, has no choice but to fight on two fronts. Western Shu has Chen Zhibao holding the fort, and the eastern front has General Gu Jiantang leading the army. In front of Beimang, they are not soft persimmons. If we take another step back, Chen Zhibao is unable to contain Beimang, and Gu Jiantang's supposedly impregnable eastern front is completely destroyed. So what? Greaton City will be given to Beimang. Our dynasty still has the strength to fight. At this point, Su Gong's hand suddenly pulled from north to south. We can retreat to the south of Guangling River in one go. Don't forget that we still have Zhao Bing's battle-hardened army. With Zhao Bing's army as the core fighting force, His Majesty can easily gather an army of 500,000. It is not a difficult matter. Su Gong suddenly laughed self-deprecatingly. Speaking of which, Beimang can really force us to this point. They are quite capable. If they win the world in the end, Su Gong, will accept it wholeheartedly. The worst that can happen is that we die in battle. Chen Wang said softly, there is a prerequisite to all of this. Su Gong was silent for a moment and then nodded. The prerequisite is that Beiliang is willing to fight to the death. Chen Wang muttered to himself, I know that person is willing. Su Gong grunted. There is no other way. He is Su Zhao's son. Anyone can retreat, but not him. Chen Wang smiled slightly and said, it is very difficult for me to connect the young master who spent money to buy poems from me to the king of Beiliang who dares to fight when he says he wants to. Su Gong didn't know how to respond. Chen Wang muttered, the snowflakes in Beiliang are as large as a banquet. Thinking about it, if Greaton City is already so snowy, my hometown will be even colder. Su Gong felt some admiration for this scholar who was more than a decade younger than him. A young man from Beiliang who entered the capital to take the Jinshi exam and passed. In the capital's officialdom, he had never said a single bad word about Beiliang. He had also never concealed his little relationship with the then heir of Beiliang. Even so, he was still in the emperor's heart and walked step by step to a high position. He even had the hope of reaching the top and fighting for the position of future leader of the civil officials. Su Gong didn't dare believe this story and didn't expect Chen Wang to tell it of his own accord. Even if Chen Wang was willing to tell it, Su Gong wouldn't dare listen, no matter how bold he was. Unless, one day, Chen Wang really did remove the prefix of Prime Minister and became a second Zhang Julu, and Su Gong also needed to become a second Gu Jiantang of the Liang dynasty. The conversation between the two was like drinking tea. It was 70 to 80% enjoyable, but there was still a lingering aftertaste. If they continued talking, they would probably feel disgusted. Su Gong stood up and bid farewell. Chen Wang also stood up to see him off. He walked him all the way to the door and said with a smile, Brother Su will be heading to the northern front tomorrow. I have to be on time to go to the diligent room, so I won't see you off. Su Gong nodded. No matter. You and I will have plenty of opportunities to meet in the future. Su Gong sat in the inconspicuous carriage and slowly left in the wind and snow. The tracks left behind by the wheels were quickly covered by the goose feather snow. Chen Wang turned around and stepped onto the steps. He looked up at the night sky and suddenly ordered the old gatekeeper, "Old Song, prepare the carriage. I want to go enjoy the snow. Also, remember to send someone to inform her." The old man was surprised. Night ban? Like Su Gong, Chen Wang didn't have time to take off his official robes and court robes. He smiled and said, "Just leave the city without changing." The old man immediately felt proud. He smiled knowingly and said, "This old servant will go right away." A short while later, a carriage came out of the southern city gates and stopped at a small crossing. Chen Wang walked down from the carriage. For some reason, he was standing at the crossing to the south, but his gaze was looking to the west. Chen Wang took out the small item he always carried with him and sniffed it lightly. When he was young, he had read an old saying, 3 lives of good karma. In this life, one can smell the fragrance of Nanmu. In his hand was a piece of Nanmu worth 10,000 gold. At that time, he was just a poor youth who had studied hard for 10 years and still had an uncertain future. He would often sit at the shady crossing covered in reeds and read. She would often listen to him while she worked on her clothes. He said that after he became famous in the imperial examinations, he would definitely return home in glory. He would definitely bring her some of this Nanmu incense. Also, he would definitely marry her. Then, he traveled thousands of li to this great peace city, the most virtuous city in the world. He successfully jumped the Dragon's Gate in the imperial examinations of thousands of soldiers and horses. But in the end he married. Lifting the red veil, that beautiful face in the candlelight. Not her. He only sent the 4 words, "Don't think about me, don't wait." After so many years, the person he was most afraid of was not the emperor whose heart was unpredictable, or the crown prince who hid his sharpness, or the omnipresent Zhao Go. He was most afraid that he would talk in his sleep, afraid that he would call out her name. He was even more afraid that the path he had chosen in his hot-bloodedness would implicate the graceful woman far away in Baoyang. She had once told him with a red face that if they married in the future, he would not be allowed to do farm labor. Because he was a scholar. Chen Wang gripped the piece of Nanmu tightly. His lips trembled as he closed his eyes. The heavy snow in the middle of winter covered his shoulders. Also, he did not pay attention to the falling snow. Chen Wang. Wang, the name of the full moon. The sun was in the east, the moon in the west, looking at each other from a distance. This worthy young prime minister slowly opened his eyes and said softly, "Have you found a good family? Even if you haven't, don't wait anymore. If you marry, you should find a scholar who knows how to cherish you more than me. You must hate me, this heartless person, right?" Chen Wang's face was filled with tears. What he didn't know was that Wataguchi Yoshihiko was still waiting for him. But he used to be standing at the ferry, but now he was lying in the reeds, waiting forever. The dead do not complain, but those who have not returned do not know. Chapter 1296. The spring snow building, known as the small temple in the southeast of Liang, was built on Lion's Cliff. The spring snow building was located in the slender Green Mountain village, which was formerly a summer resort of the Dechu dynasty. It was destroyed by the fires of the Spring and Autumn War. After Guangling Wang Zhao spared no effort in expanding it, he collected countless famous flowers and rare stones and raised them in his boudoir. Among them was a huge rock from the Spring God Lake that was carried to the village by the Guangling Navy and the vassal king's cavalry. It was shaped like a pearl and was worthy of being called the most famous stone in the world. It was also a treasure that contained feng shui. The slender Green Mountain village faced the Guangling River to the south. In the Lion's Cliff area, scholars from Jiangnan often climbed high to write poems. After it became the vassal king's exclusive residence of the emperor's younger brother, Zhao Yi, only the Guangling Path had the right to enter the spring snow building to discuss politics. It was a special benefit for a small group of influential people. Lion's Cliff was also known as the Treasure Trove Mountain. In the last years of the Defeng dynasty, There was a saying that an enlightened monk subdued a lion here. It attracted the magnificent phenomenon of flowers falling from the sky like rain. From the last years of the Defeng dynasty to the first year of the Yonghui dynasty, every time there was a war, these ownerless stones were constantly picked up by travelers, wanderers, and quarrymen until less than a tenth remained and entered the homes of the common people. After Zhao Yi was made a vassal, he either took it by force or bought it at a high price. The huge rocks surrounding the spring god lake were scattered around randomly and gradually covered Lion's Cliff. On the cliff was the spring snow building. There was a well downstairs. The first light snow in Jiangnan arrived slowly and then suddenly disappeared. However, the fires of war in the Guangling Path were really frightening. Whether it snowed or not, the size of the snowfall did not matter. The winter's snow melted and it was noon. The scenery on Lion's Cliff was beautiful and gentle. A fat man sat alone at the mouth of the well below the building. This small well had always been dry and it was unknown why it was dug. It had been a mystery since ancient times. The fat man was wearing a bright yellow python robe embroidered with gold. Among the vassal kings of Liang, only this fat pig had such an honor. Even the king of Bailiang, Su Shao, who had no merit in the past, only had a large blue satin python robe. The king of Yanqi, Zhao Bing, was inferior to this fat pig in terms of dragon poise and python water. As for the more substantial vassal lands, the southern border, which was full of miasma all year round, naturally couldn't be compared to Guangling, where half of the world's taxes came from. The Liang court had always had bad comments about Guangling king, who was the most suspected of receiving rewards without merit. The number of imperial censors and imperial censors who died directly or indirectly at the hands of Guangling king was even more shocking. Now that he had finally received his retribution, the fat man, who was being roasted on the bonfire, did not seem to be as panicked and lost as the outside world imagined. Instead, he sat quietly at the mouth of the well without any hostility or dejection. Whenever Zhao Yi sat in a daze in the well, even the trusted aides of the spring snow building did not dare disturb him. In the distance, His Royal Highness, Zhao Yuang, stood respectfully. The main general of the Western Front, Song Li, who had just returned from the front lines, stood shoulder to shoulder with him. On the Guangling River outside the cliff, there were densely packed Navy warships. Although it was said that half of the Guangling Navy had been taken away by West Chu, that was only a loss in numbers. Most of the ships were firmly in the hands of the Guangling army. Zhao Yuang and Song Li had a close relationship and had called each other brothers for many years. Everyone knew that in Guangling, only by becoming Song Li's woman could one truly escape the clutches of His Royal Highness. Otherwise, even if one had a provincial governor as a father, they could not be considered a life-saving talisman. At this time, Zhao Yuang lowered his voice and said angrily, "Back then, it was said that the Grand Tutor of West Chu had fled here and was unwilling to accept the summons of the Su family's iron cavalry. He carried the fallen princess and resolutely jumped off the cliff to meet his death." Nonsense. Lame Su clearly tricked the court. Su Shao should be given an even more disgusting title. Song Li smiled and did not agree. He turned his head and glanced at the roiling river flowing east. After the fall of Chu, there was no spring and autumn. After the high cliff, there was no central plains. When Chu was destroyed, there were still southern Tang and western Shu that stubbornly resisted. However, there was already such a saying in the literary world. Zhao Yuang yawned and his mind wandered. Suddenly, Song Li bumped into his arm. Only then did Zhao Yuang realize that his father was waving at them. Zhao Yuang hurried forward and walked with Song Li to the side of the well. Zhao Yi looked at Song Li and asked with a smile, "Then Ko Jianghuai really resigned and went into seclusion?" Song Li nodded and said, "At the beginning, this general also thought that it was Chao Zhangqing's smokescreen. Now, it seems that Ko Jianghuai's abrupt abdication of responsibility should not be far from the truth." Zhao Yi gave Song Li an encouraging look. Song Li thought for a moment before continuing. The situation on the Western Front was already in tatters. If Ko Jianghuai continues to expand his military achievements, at least half of Prince's tens of thousands of cavalry will have to be lost if we want to stop Ko Jianghuai's advance. Putting aside the fact that Ko Jianghuai's departure was rumored to be because he did not agree with Chao Changqing's political views, or that there were people in West Chu's court who did not want him to be too powerful and thus made things difficult for him. In any case, it is definitely a good thing for Prince. Before spring, there won't be any major movements on the Western Front. Chao Changqing agreeing to Ko Jianghuai's departure was very unreasonable. Perhaps in the future, historians will evaluate this matter and see it as an important turning point. Chapter 1297. The unusually large Zhao Yi grunted in acknowledgement. He bent down with some difficulty to pick up a stone and held it in his palm. He felt the coolness of the stone and asked, "Let's not talk about the future. Let's talk about the present. Song Li, do you think Chao Changqing will lead the army personally or let Xie Shibian fill in for Ko Jianghuai? No matter who is in charge of the Western Front, it doesn't seem to be good news." Song Li said without hesitation, "It's more likely that Xie Shibian will lead the army. Chao Changqing will most likely retreat behind the scenes to strategize." Zhao Yi said self-deprecatingly, "That's right. Why would Chao Changqing care about this king and Lu Xingxiang? He only has eyes for Gu Jiantang. As long as Gu Jiantang doesn't go south from the Liao border, Chao Changqing won't appear to take charge." Song Li nodded and said, "It seems conceited, but it's also a long-term consideration. Chao Changqing is too conspicuous. He can only give Xie Shibian and Ko Jianghuai enough opportunities to grow if he doesn't interfere with the specific deployment of troops." Zhao Yi suddenly laughed and said, "There are no heroes in the world. Only the villains can become famous." Zhao Yu was a little confused. He knew that the so-called villains were people like Xie Shibian and Ko Jianghuai, but he didn't know who his father's so-called heroes were. Zhao Yi sighed and said, "Back then, Lame Su only needed to lightly kick to sink the land of Shenzhou." Zhao Yi's face was full of sarcasm. "This time, vassal King Jingnan is very loud. Let's not talk about small raindrops. There's no such thing. Other than that old fool Zhao Bing's son who has ulterior motives, the rest are a bunch of good-for-nothings. If Lame Su hadn't died, he could have casually pulled out 50,000 elite cavalry from Bailiang and Chao Changqing and his West Chu wouldn't have been able to do anything. As for Zhao Heng, if he was willing to give his all and join forces with this king, they would also be able to solve this problem. However, Zhao Bing was just as scheming as Zhao Heng, who was ridiculed by Su Shao as a woman. However, Zhao Heng was a far cry from Zhao Bing's ability to feign ignorance. Before Chao Changqing and the little girl had raised the flag, they had purposefully sent 3 urgent memorials to Great Peace City saying that the South was in chaos. Hadn't they sent a letter of apology not long ago? He said that the 16 clans of the Southern Barbarian colluded with the remnants of the West Chu, which led to 3 consecutive defeats on the front line that he personally led, losing several tens of thousands of men and horses. Tens of thousands? *CK your mother. Hundreds of people, right? Your son, who was only a teenager, could go to the hinterland of Southern Barbarian to chop people's heads and build a capital. Zhao Bing, when you went, you were defeated, and you lost 3 times? What did Nalin Yusi, who claimed to be able to break a city with a flick of his finger and destroy a country with a wave of his sleeve, do? A big man, he couldn't have gotten pregnant because of you, Zhao Bing, right? Zhao Yi sighed. Among all the kings, the old king of Jing and Zhao Heng, who couldn't recover from the setback, had the most grievances and the greatest limitations. The king of Huainan, Zhao Ying, had the most talent but the least ability. The king of Jiaodong, Zhao Sui, had the softest temper and the least temperament from beginning to end. As for this king, he had the smallest vision and couldn't compete for the title of the best cavalry in the world. He was satisfied with the title of the best navy in the world. He had the smallest ambition and never coveted the throne. He had been like this since he was a child. He even went to Lame Su and almost knelt down in front of him so that my brother could sit on the throne. So in these years, outsiders said that this king had a fierce reputation and Su Shao, the king of Bailiang, was the awe-inspiring one. If we were to talk about who this prince loathes the most, it would be Zhao Bing. He changes his rudder when the wind blows, burns the bridge after crossing the river, and is a master of honeyed words and swords. It's a pity that Imperial Brother has always been wholeheartedly guarding against the Northwest. No matter how this prince, his biological younger brother of the same father and mother, tries to persuade him, he still refuses to make a move against the southern border. Zhao Yi smiled sadly and looked up at his son, Zhao Yuang, and said self-mockingly, "That year when Su Fengnian came to Guangling River, you had a deadly feud with him. This king deliberately showed weakness to Su Xiao and cut a piece of meat from you and sent it to Bailiang. Then at this time, he sent a secret letter to my brother. It wasn't to say anything bad about Su Xiao and Bailiang, but to say that Zhao Bing couldn't be allowed to accumulate power. As a result, my brothers still didn't care. If cutting off a few pounds of meat from this king could change my brother's mind, this king would really do it. Since my brother didn't want to be the bad guy, then this king would do it. So in this half a year, this king had people secretly assassinate the crown prince of Yanqi 4 times, but they all returned without success." Song Li was silent. Zhao Yuang, hearing this for the first time, opened his mouth wide in shock. Zhao Yi threw out the stone that was still warm in his palm. Later, when Chen Zhibao entered the capital to take up the post of Minister of War, this king knew that this person would definitely be given the title of king. So, he sent a secret letter to my brother, proposing that Chen Zhibao be given the territory between Guangling Road and Nanjiang Road. If Chen Zhibao felt that the territory was too small, this king could even give up one more province. The two of you know what the result was. Zhao Yi laughed and said, "Piao, father just wants you to inherit the throne. I don't even hope that my grandson will become a Qinhuang. In the future, he will definitely go to Great Peace City to be a prince of pleasure. But Zhao Bing will be much more domineering as a father." Then Zhao Yi exhaled deeply and waved his hand tiredly. Zhao Yuang and Song Li, who had been silent all this time, retreated. Zhao Yi continued to sit at the mouth of the well, looking at the sky. He was like a fool looking at the sky from the bottom of a well. Chapter 1298. The battlefield was like a melting pot, crushing anything that had anything to do with self-righteousness. In the Bailiang Frontier Army, apart from a few high-ranking officers who knew how to use weapons other than the standard, such as Ningamei's halberds and Li Mofan's mobile arsenal that could not be viewed with common sense, there were also a few who had their own lances. Other than that, almost all of the border army soldiers did not carry anything that seemed heavy or ingenious. As for the battle between cavalry, it was definitely not like what many people imagined. After charging into each other, they would slow down their horses and attack each other. This kind of unsightly scene could make even the most experienced cavalry collapse. It was truly a waste of precious cavalry to treat them like foot soldiers. In reality, it was like the two weapons of Jianghu people sparring, dispersing upon contact and then searching for the next opportunity. If the Longxiang army, with 3,000 cavalry chasing 7,000 Chang cavalry, did not achieve any results in the previous charge against Ke's Chang cavalry, after stretching out a distance, Wang Lingbao would turn his head to observe the enemy cavalry's movements and decide whether to directly stop and turn around or slowly circle around to launch a second round of attacks. If there were still no clear signs of victory or defeat in the second round of collisions, Wang Lingbao would have to use the casualties on his side to choose which unit should give up the heavy spears and switch to the lighter cold blades, and which unit should continue to use the spears or the light crossbows. On the battlefield of a stalemate, a small advantage could increase one's advantage, but a single flaw was enough to bury the entire army. From Great General Su Xiao to General Chen Zhibao, the two people who had left the deepest imprint on the Bailiang cavalry both believed in one thing. The true strength of the Su family cavalry was that they had enough patience and strength to wait for the enemy to take the initiative to make a mistake. Encountering such an invulnerable enemy, the Chang cavalry undoubtedly had 8 lifetimes of bad luck. The Chang cavalry originally thought that they were wolves in a flock of sheep. Not only could they eat their fill in Liuzhou, they could even go to the rich central plains and pillage. All of the cavalry had heard year after year of people talking about the beauty of the central plains. There were countless fields and mountains of shining silver. Moreover, the women there were of all shapes and sizes. Most importantly, their skin was much better than the women on the grasslands who were exposed to the sun and wind. To the touch, it was like touching fine silk. But in reality, before the sky turned dark, the beautiful dream was shattered. The 3,000 dragon elephant cavalry killed them like stray dogs. If not for the Chang cavalry's unique speed, in this kind of retreat, under the dragon elephant cavalry's pursuit, they would not even last an hour. The cold crossbows that had been hidden away during the previous charge were finally starting to show their terrifying killing power. For the sake of pursuing the greatest speed, the Chang cavalry even took the initiative to abandon the spears and lances they were unfamiliar with. As for the armor they wore, it was only the standard issue for Northern Mang's ordinary light cavalry. Compared to the light but sturdy and expensive armor of the Southern Dynasty's great generals, the difference was too great. One must know that the crossbows were a freak that successfully combined the strengths of the Qin crossbows and Feng crossbows. They were easy to assemble and disassemble. After 2 generations of Beiliang craftsmen improving the bows, the various Zhongliang crossbows had a close to perfect balance. Other than firing speed, the range, penetrative power, and accuracy of the large crossbows were better than the longbows. In the countless battles between the dynasties of the Central Plains and the nomads of the north, the foot crossbows and ballistae could be used to great effect. As a result, some people said that for thousands of years, the Central Plains had used 2 things to block the horse hooves of the nomads. The first was the majestic cities and the second was the crossbows. Amongst which, if Beiliang, who could be said to be second in the use of crossbows, no one would dare to say they were first. The Northern Mang and the Southern dynasties couldn't be more familiar with Northern Liang's short crossbows. It could even be said that they loathed them deeply. The great king of the southern courtyard, Huang Songpu, had once worked hard to promote similar short crossbows on a large scale. However, due to various complicated reasons, he was obstructed by many sides, and the results were minimal. The dragon elephant cavalry with the best riding skills were in charge of stopping the Chang cavalry and slowing them down. As long as they caused damage, they didn't care about the life and death of the Chang cavalry. Even if a Chang cavalry fell off their horse, they wouldn't take a second look at the military merit that was within their reach. Everything was left to the comrades behind who didn't have a crossbow to stab and kill with a spear. With such a clear division of labor, it was naturally really vicious and bloody. To these haggard Chang cavalry, the silver lining was that the teen who tossed the black tiger around for fun. After the initial round of killing, he got back on his horse and stopped killing. It wasn't that the Chang cavalry didn't think about fleeing in all directions like birds and beasts to avoid being chased down by the dragon elephant cavalry. However, as soon as this thought appeared, the dragon elephant cavalry, under the command of that tall and sturdy man, immediately had a way to deal with it. Apart from the dragon elephant cavalry and crossbow cavalry that were tangling with the Chang cavalry, the 2,000 dragon elephant spear cavalry quickly spread out, and then suddenly charged forward, all of them raising their crossbows, almost forming a pocket formation with the crossbow cavalry in front of them. When the Chang cavalry gave up on this idea and continued to crazily retreat towards the north, those dragon elephant cavalry gradually slowed down, resting on the backs of their horses. This kind of combat strength was even more hidden than crossbow attacks, making the Chang cavalry feel their scalps go numb and a chill run down their spines. Chapter 1299. The nomads in the north were born to live on horseback. Because they were born with hardships, they had no choice but to fight bravely. However, the vast land also nurtured the unruly nature of the grassland knights that went deep into their bones. They could be brave and fearless and launch a wild charge at lightning speed. However, their messy frontline was not worth mentioning in the eyes of the Central Plains military experts. Their valiant attitude of roaring and waving their blades, and even lifting their butts off the back of the horse, was an edge that had to be polished off in the strict Beiliang frontier army. The Beiliang cavalry valued unity the most and did not worship heroes who fought alone. Huang Songpu, Lu Ge, and Yang Yuanzhan were able to stand out in Beimang because they preserved the advantages of Beimang and learned the essence of the Central Plains art of war while suppressing the weaknesses of the Beimang. Today, the 3,000 dragon elephant cavalry were the teachers, and the Chang cavalry were the students. The teachers taught the students this principle. Unfortunately, the school fees were too expensive and had to be exchanged with their lives. Wang Lingbao calculated the speed of the Chang cavalry's retreat, the geography of the southern dynasty's border, the distribution of troops, and the speed of the other two dragon elephant cavalry's reinforcements. He was considering whether or not he should just kill his way into Gusai Prefecture and sneak behind Lu Gui and stab the southern dynasty generals but with his iron spear. In the Bailiang frontier army, no one cared much about the old southern courtyard king Huang Songpu or Yang Yuanzhan. Only Lu Gui was someone that everyone wanted to behead. The reason was simple. The northern barbarians kept saying that Lu Gui can be half a Su Shao. Wang Lingbao could not tolerate it. The entire Bailiang frontier army could not tolerate it. As a fierce general who had experienced hundreds of battles at the border, Wang Lingbao naturally had his own thoughts. His two thoughts were not selfish. One was to kill Lu Gui, and the other was to use his own dragon elephant cavalry to fight a great battle against the two kings' heavy cavalry. In the soul-stirring history of war, there had never been a true battle between light cavalry and heavy cavalry. Even Liang Mang, who produced a lot of war horses and had excellent horse management, used light cavalry more often in their 20 years of confrontation. They had enough mobility to launch surprise attacks and pursue. On the border of Liang Mang, where blood was destined to flow for thousands of miles in the future, both sides had the best war horses, the sharpest war blades, the bravest cavalry, and the most spacious and flat battlefield. Perhaps one day, the first battle between heavy cavalry and heavy cavalry in the history of war would erupt. Among the Bailiang cavalry, besides the great snow dragon cavalry, there were close to 6,000 heavy cavalry from the old Longxiang army. Meanwhile, the great snow dragon riders were Bailiang's most crucial asset and wouldn't be easily mobilized. As a result, Wang Lingbao firmly believed that he had a high chance of letting the entire world see what a battle of heavy cavalry was like. For the next 100 or 1,000 years, there would be people who would never forget about this. No one would forget that there was an army called the Bailiang Cavalry. Wang Lingbao never had any sense of righteousness for the country or the people. As for Bailiang defending the northwest to the death, they were schemed against by the Liang imperial court and treated as heartless barbarians by the people of the Central Plains. Did he not have any resentment? He did, and it was a great deal. However, the history books could forget about Wang Lingbao, a small figure who died, but they could not forget the general's life's work, the Bailiang army. Wang Lingbao suddenly saw the commander wave at him. He quickly rode forward, and Su Longxiang calmly said, "Lead the troops and chase for 30 miles. Kill as many as you can, and then return to Qingcang City." Although Wang Lingbao was full of doubts, he still didn't have any doubts. Then, this deputy general of the Longxiang army saw the youth reveal a rare savage smile. He jumped onto the black tiger and charged north, directly leaping over a large group of Chang cavalry and heading north alone. Could it be that there was a big fish ahead of him? Wang Lingbao naturally wanted more military merits. It would be even better if he could go to Gusai province and show off. However, he wasn't a brute who didn't know the importance of things. The military merits of all 8,000 Chang cavalry added together couldn't compare to Su Longxiang. Someone who could move the heart of the young commander was definitely not a small fry. Wang Lingbao immediately made a decision. After calling over a few captains, he ordered in a deep voice, "Within 30 miles, kill all the Chang cavalry. If you miss a few, you will have their merits deducted. If your merits aren't enough, what will happen to you? According to the old rules of the Longxiang army, you know better than me what will happen. In this 30-mile journey, you are allowed to kill as much as you want." The sun was setting in the west. More than 100 li north of the youth on the black tiger, two people didn't ride horses. They were flying through the air, heading south. The middle-aged swordsman wore the #1 sword of the Beimeng dynasty, the calm disturbance. He was as graceful as a sword immortal. The person next to him was astonishingly tall. He was twice as tall as the Jiangnan girl. His entire body was golden, and his face was solemn. He was like a divine general of the heavenly court who had descended into the mortal world. Another 100 li behind them, a rider was galloping. The rider wore a black bamboo hat and was shrouded in a wide black robe. He seemed to be afraid of sunlight. His fingers holding the reins were constantly trembling. It wasn't just his fingers and arms that were trembling. His entire body was trembling. Even his lips and teeth were no exception. This was the price one had to pay to reincarnate in someone else's body. It was precisely because he had paid such a painful price that he was able to linger on at death's door. He wanted the Su brothers to die more than anyone else, and he wanted them to die even more miserably than him. He truly had died, and someone had torn him apart while he was still alive. But planting a willow would produce shade. He was a willow. He had relied on a long-lost secret art of the Qin dynasty to come back from the dead. Chapter 1300. As the sun set in the west, it was like an old man past his prime. Unable to bear the silence any longer, large clouds of fire gathered in the western sky, burning brilliantly. As the saying goes, one can't go out early, but one can travel 1,000 miles late. Then there would definitely be people who wouldn't have the chance to go on a long journey tomorrow. The sunlight shone so brightly that the green-clothed swordsman in the desert seemed to be wearing a golden armor. The middle-aged swordsman walked a few feet above the 1,000 miles of yellow sand and looked up at the rosy clouds in the west. His left thumb pressed on the sword hilt, and the ancient sword in the scabbard was about to come out. Originally, with his lofty character, he wouldn't join hands with others to target someone. However, he was in the sect and had no choice. Since it was the Empress and the Taiping Commandant's instructions, he could only act against his will. According to the signs revealed by the hibernation vat in Shijing, Su Longxiang should be nearby. However, it would take a bit of luck to meet and kill him. After all, it was not easy to find a cavalry of 10,000 people in the thousands of miles of yellow sand at the border, let alone one person. It was tantamount to finding a needle in a haystack. If Su Longxiang had reached the celestial state, where he could resonate with heaven and earth, Huang Qing could barely reach the celestial state. However, according to the spies of the spiderweb, this young man who was born in the Vajra realm eventually stayed at the threshold of the Finger Mystery realm. He didn't choose to break through the realm like a hot knife through butter. Huang Qing suddenly stopped. His feet gently landed on the sand, and his thumb pressed harder on the sword hilt. In an instant, 6 or 7 wisps of sword chi lingered around the calm storm scabbard. In the chess and sword music school, the bronze man grandmaster, who was 1 generation higher than the Taiping commandant, also stopped. His expression was as calm as an ancient well. Huang Qing looked forward and smiled softly. "Grandmaster, why don't you leave this task to me?" The head of sword chi did not even reach the shoulder of the golden giant. The martial arts grandmaster who rarely showed up in Beimeng nodded and said calmly, "You can go first." The meaning of the grandmaster's words was very clear. In his opinion, sword chi might not be able to take down Su Longxiang. Huang Qing dismissed it with a smile and did not complain. He was extremely respectful to this grandmaster, not only because of the difference in seniority, but also because of the grandmaster's path of proving Dao. This grandmaster and Wang Xinji were like the same year, in terms of textual research. Compared to the martial god of Beimeng, Tuoba Bodhisattva, and Xinyuan Pan in the Liyang realm, they had tested the feasibility of opening the heaven's gate on their own. The saints of the 3 sects of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism had proven Dao and immortality by borrowing the gate of heaven and earth. However, the Grand Master of Bronze Man and the others had directly chosen to break the gate and enter. The reason why Li Chungang, who had already passed away, was known as the first person after Ancestor Lu was because this sword god was even rarer. He strived to use the sword in his hand to build his own heaven's gate. Li Chuangong's sword Dao was unique and was close to the heavenly Dao. This was the competition of the path under each person's feet. It had nothing to do with the ranking of the martial arts evaluation. However, if Wang Xinji was once the whetstone of the Liyang Jianghu, then the Grand Master of Bronze Man beside Huang Qing was another whetstone of the Beimeng Jianghu. From Toba Bodhisattva, to Murong Baoding and the 5th Raccoon, to Hong Jingyan, without exception, they had all exchanged pointers with the Grand Master of Bronze Man. Unlike the old monster Wang of the martial emperor city who had a perfect record of winning hundreds of battles in 60 years, the Grand Master of Bronze Man did not have such a terrifying number of battles. He also did not have the shocking rumor of crushing any top experts. However, no matter who he faced, he was undefeated. He only hoped to not lose and not win. The imperial decree of peace once said that the Grand Master of Bronze Man only needed to be undefeated when he fought with others. It was only necessary to win the final battle with the heavenly Tao. The Grand Master of Bronze Man reminded softly, "This person once broke Murong Baoding's invincible Vajra in the Qingtsong city. You should be careful. It's best if you don't engage in close combat." Huang Qing's aura was already rising, and his sword intent was overflowing. He slowly pulled his sword out of the scabbard by 2 inches and acknowledged. He then smiled and said, "Grand Master, Huang Qing will take his leave first." The Grand Master of Bronze Man nodded his head and said, "I will keep an eye on that child who doesn't know his place first." Huang Qing gently let out a breath and skimmed towards the south. The wisps of sword aura outside the scabbard gradually became as thick as a green rainbow as Huang Qing sprinted. The sword aura was close. It was a magnificent sight. The steed heading south didn't slow down after seeing the golden giant and rushed to the side of the Grand Master of Bronze Man. He originally wanted to brush past the Grand Master of Bronze Man in a spurt of energy. However, the warhorse suddenly stopped as if it had crashed into an invisible wall and even retreated a few steps. Wearing a conical bamboo hat and a black robe, One Section Willow reached out his hand and touched the mane of his mount. He finally managed to pacify the Fergana-treasured colt that was feeling extremely restless. His hand was deathly pale like snow without any color of blood, and the meridians under his skin were clearly visible. One Section Willow, who was once the chief assassin of the spiderweb, was obviously displeased. Is there a need to be so cautious? In front of the sword aura that is close, there is no bullshit Vajra realm in the world. Even if there is, it would be Li Xiaoxin of the 2 Zen temples. The tall and sturdy giant crossed his arms over his chest with an indifferent expression. One Section Willow suddenly bent over and laughed like a madman. He pointed at the Grand Master of Bronze Man. "I was wrong. I actually forgot about you who was close at hand. In the past, the Spear Immortal King came to Beimang to practice his spear. In the end, he was blocked by you with his bare hands." The Grand Master of Bronze Man shot a glance at this pitiful worm who should have had a bright future but ended up in a life worse than death. He didn't conceal the pity in his eyes. An illegitimate child who couldn't see the light of day, others would be somewhat afraid of him. Why would he need to care? Even if One Section Willow's father was standing here, it was nothing. Li Mibi, the creator of the spiderweb, Beimang's #1 spy, and a man who was said to be able to sit on Her Majesty's couch to discuss matters. So what? One Section Willow's face was gloomy. The Grand Master of Bronze Man, who was always serious in speech and manner at the chess and sword music school, sneered for the first time. "I've seen many stunning young people in my life. They all thought that the whole world should revolve around them. They never talked about retreating when doing things. In the end, without exception, they all died very early, and the way they died was quite miserable." One Section Willow sneered. "Then isn't Su Fengnian living well?" The Grand Master of Bronze Man laughed out loud for the first time. His laughter was like thunder, shaking the heavens. "Are you worthy of being mentioned in the same breath as him?" One Section Willow seemed to have gone mad. He lowered his head and bit a finger. "I'm not worthy? I, Li Fengshou, entered King Kong at the age of 14. At the age of 20, I entered Finger Profound Realm. At the age of 22, I went to challenge to Oba. What was Su Fengnian doing at that time?" The Grand Master of Bronze Man asked in reply. "What is Su Fengnian doing now? What are you doing now?" One Section Willow raised his head and looked at the gradually fading clouds of fire. He pretended to be indifferent. "His life is good. I lost to him, but it's not because of battle." The Grand Master of Bronze Man narrowed his eyes and looked at the twilight above his head. According to the records of the Chess and Sword Music School and the Princess's Tomb, from the Great Qin Dynasty to the Great Feng Dynasty to the Spring and Autumn period, in the past 800 years, there were only traces of banished immortals. There were a total of 37 of them, and all of them died young. These banished immortals had good lives. Naturally, they were born with good lives. But when they landed on Earth, most of them were unacclimatized and were harmed by the great Tao of the underworld. The Grand Master of Bronze Man sighed. The people of the world painstakingly seek longevity and prove the Tao of heaven. But that's only something in the pockets of the people of heaven above the clouds. You must know that no matter how delicious the food given out is, it's still food given out. One section Willow Li Fengshuo frowned and asked, "Why are you telling me this?" The Grand Master of Bronze Man calmly said, "There aren't many good seedlings in Beimeng now. As for the future, I advise you to turn back. Don't be a beggar or a thief. Learn from Li Chungang and Wang Xianxia and become a bandit." Dusk descended and the sun set. One section Willow slowly took off the bamboo hat used to block the sun. He coldly said, "I've already died once. At most, I'll die again." The Grand Master of Bronze Man shook his head. "Since it's like this, then rather than letting you die at the hands of Su Longxiang, it's better to let me send you on your way." One section Willow turned pale with fright. Without waiting for him to retreat, his entire body soared into the air. It was as if he was suspended in the middle of a spider web. His limbs were twisted and his head was twisted. Right at this moment, the Grand Master of Bronze Man looked towards the distant east. There was purple chi coming from the east. The Grand Master of Bronze Man hesitated for a moment. He leaned to the side and took a step towards the east. One step covered 100 zhang. One section Willow, who had escaped this calamity, fiercely fell to the ground like a puddle of mud. One section Willow sat on the ground and gasped for breath. Then he lost his mind and laughed wildly. "Su Fengyan, you're even more damned to have met this monster than you are to have met Tuoba. Li Chuangong's bitter end is Wang Xianxia, Wang Xianxia's bitter end is you. Then today, you should have a taste of what those two people tasted." Chapter 1301. A green rainbow appeared on the land. The sword aura was sharp and unstoppable. It collided with Su Longxiang. The young man and the black tiger under Qi Xuanzhen stood together. They didn't use the cold blade to meet the enemy. Instead, they stuck the war blade into the ground. In 3 years, the stubborn child who didn't want to go to Mount Longhu with the old immortal of the Daoist master's residence had grown to become the commander of an important border army in Beiliang. In the eyes of the world, the young man was different from his brother who didn't do proper work and often traveled the Jianghu. He was more like the son of the butcher Su Shao. He didn't like luxury and wasn't good at romance. However, he was famous on the battlefield like his father. He had won the title of the 10,000 enemy. There was only one flaw. He had never fought with a top master. However, he was the complete opposite of Su Fengyan from His Royal Highness to the King of Beiliang. Su Longxiang didn't have any doubts. Even when he led the dragon elephant cavalry at a young age, he quickly convinced the people. He even caused a storm in the official circles of Beiliang. Why didn't the amazing Su Longxiang inherit Su Zhao's title? Su Longxiang was carefully nurtured by Zhao Shituan of Mount Longhu. He taught him the dream of spring and autumn and gradually opened his mind. Huang Man was no longer the stupid Huang Man of the past. His mind was no different from that of an ordinary person. He also retained a pure heart. Although pure heart was a saying from the scholarly sage, it was actually no different from the Buddha who doesn't touch karma, and Tao embryo who doesn't provoke dust recorded in the secret books. They could be considered as the immortality of the 3 sections. Su Longxiang turned a blind eye to the imposing and thick sword aura. Instead, he turned his head to look at the black tiger and grinned. In the eyes of outsiders, this spiritual creature that had once listened to the words of the sage beside the great Daoist Qi for dozens of years to comprehend the Tao was still somewhat suspected of being unworthy of this young man. The black tiger, which was twice the size of an ordinary king of the forest, had a very human expression on its face. It lowered its huge head and touched Su Longxiang's forehead. Su Longxiang reached out his hand to stroke Black Tiger's head and muttered to himself, "When I was young, my mother often punished my brother to recite books. Back then, I didn't understand anything and would forget what I heard. I only felt that my brother was reading books." At this point, Su Longxiang imitated the young Su Fengyan and shook his head. "Very beautiful." There was a smile on the young man's face. Later on, my father often said in private that our Su family's ancestral graves were blessed with green smoke. Finally, there was a scholar. Black Tiger suddenly lay on the ground. When he heard the word scholar, he revealed a deep sense of nostalgia. Once upon a time, on the demon-slaying platform of the Lotus Peak, the Zhenren who was praised by the common people as having immortality would recite scriptures at sunrise and sunset every day. Occasionally, there would be people who would climb to the peak to visit and discuss the Tao with Qi Xuanzhen. Lotus flowers would bloom from their mouths and spring thunder would sound. Black Tiger had accompanied Qi Xuanzhen, the reincarnated ancestor Lu, for a long time. It was greatly blessed and had great fortune. Even the noble Huang Zi of the Taoist master's residence had to treat it with respect. They would never dare to treat it as a beast. The green rainbow was already less than 10 miles away from the man and the tiger. Su Longxiang smiled. When I was young, my eldest sister was lazy. She didn't even want to learn needlework, much less read and write. She only liked to listen to my brother tell stories of immortals. Every time she couldn't sleep, she would pull my brother to sit by the bed and tell him stories. She would only allow my brother to leave after she fell asleep. No matter how tired my brother was during the day, he wouldn't refuse. Furthermore, the things in my eldest sister's room were always thrown away carelessly. My brother would always help her tidy up when he was free. Later on, my eldest sister married far away in Jiangnan. Everything was neatly placed in its original place. My brother, who should have felt relaxed, was instead always very. Probably because he didn't know what words to use to describe his brother, the young man scratched his head and simply put down his brows. Su Longxiang forcefully exhaled. Looking forward, his gaze became determined. He said in a low voice, "My father is a big, uncouth man. Furthermore, the matters at the border are incomparably heavy. Even if he wanted to, he was powerless. He never knew how to get along with us children. It was always my brother who took care of my 2 sisters and my idiotic younger brother. I don't know much, but since someone is fighting at our doorstep, and since I was born with some strength, I can't let my brother bear the burden alone like when I was young." Before I entered the Longxiang army, second sister said that there were some Qi cultivators in the Beimeng army who were good at observing aura. They specifically targeted the top experts in the Beiliang army so that they could plan before taking action. She also said that the Beimeng spiderweb had secretly formulated a series of dragon-slaying plans, placing my brother at the top of the list. I was also in the top 5. Thus, second sister didn't allow me to have killing intent in my heart and use all my strength to prevent the aura from leaking out. But I thought that rather than letting them sneak around and plot against my brother, it would be better for me to be the bait and disrupt their plans. Su Longxiang pointed at the green rainbow that was like a hot knife through butter. He smiled happily and said, "Look, didn't someone take the bait?" This time, Su Longxiang disobeyed military orders and led troops to intercept and kill the Chang cavalry. He did not wear the indestructible talisman armor and did not even bring it with him. He left it in the commander-in-chief's tent outside Qingcang City. Since young, his elder brother, Su Fengnian, would always give him the best things, Su Jihu, Su Weisheng. It had always been like this. Su Longxiang clenched his fists and heavily punched in front of his chest. There seemed to be a loud sound of a bell ringing over thousands of miles of yellow sand. With him as the center, countless yellow sand rolled and spread out rapidly. At the same time, before the green rainbow arrived, the sword aura arrived. In the distance, the swordsman of the chess and sword music school, Huang Qing, closed his eyes. The ancient sword at his waist was still less than 2 inches out of its sheath. When the 2 sides fought, apart from that black tiger, no one else was watching. Copper Man, who was 100 miles away, also rushed to the east for the purple energy. However, if someone saw this and didn't know that the sword energy was close to Huang Qing's identity, even a grade 2 Master Realm expert would feel pity for this swordsman to use his sword energy so wantonly. When experts faced an enemy, they didn't compete in flashy moves. Instead, they focused on holding back when accumulating strength and not releasing it. After gathering strength, they would kill in one strike. For the green shirt swordsman to release his energy right before the fight, he was just too arrogant. Only those who had reached the first level of the Finger Mystery realm could see some clues. This swordsman was not deliberately showing off his power like a street brawl, nor was he beating the drums to gain the upper hand before 2 armies faced each other. Instead, the aura of this person who was carrying a sword but had not drawn it was too strong. When the moon was full, it would fall. When water was full, it would overflow. Huang Qing's sword energy was so strong that he needed to suppress it to not injure others. The chess and sword music schools Huang Qing lived up to his name of sword energy close. Since he was so rich that he could rival a country, so what if he spent a lot of money? Huang Qing, who kept his eyes closed, muttered, "One dendrobium pearl, to the diamond realm." The sword in the sheath went from 2 inches to 3 inches. 1 dendrobium was 100 liters. How heavy was a pearl in the world? So how many dendrobium was there? The 3-inch sword gave off a glow, instantly giving off hundreds and thousands of green pearls formed from sword energy. Green pearls of different sizes rolled forward, like numerous green lightning bolts rolling across the ground, heading straight for Su Longxiang. In the distance, Su Longxiang, who could already see the majestic scene, only twitched the corner of his mouth like he was disdainful. The teen raised his arm and punched the ground heavily. When Su Fengnian first appeared in the Bailiang frontier army, the teen Su Longxiang personally beat the drums. In the next moment, between the teen and the sword energy, sand dunes exploded. Earth dragons protruded out, yellow sand filled the sky. Like a bull turning over. The teen who was born at the Diamond Realm and had the strength of a dragon elephant was close to the sword energy. The battle between the two of them would perhaps be a battle of strength that had never been seen before and would never be seen again. Chapter 1302. This battle of strength was also like a battle of contradictions. In the water element, the dragon force was the strongest, and in the land element, the elephant force was the strongest. Su Longxiang, the only lucky person in the world who was born in the Vajra realm, was known as Bailiang's sturdiest shield. However, he met Huang Qing of Beimang's 13 prefectures, who was the sharpest spear in Beimang. Huang Qing's sword was only 3 inches out, but it was already magnificent. It was like the sword Immortal in the sky had broken a string of prayer beads. Thousands of sword energy beads, big and small, fell on a jade plate and rolled forward. Su Longxiang, on the other hand, used the desert as a drum. With a punch, he attracted the scene of the earth bowl turning over. The sky and earth were turned upside down, and yellow tornadoes broke out of the ground continuously. The green pearls condensed by the sword energy were smashed into pieces in the yellow sand, filling the sky with dust and obscuring one's vision. Although the earth bull had the unrivaled spirit of pulling up mountains and rivers, each and every one of the pearls guided by the sword aura contained spirituality. Although 8 or 9 out of 10 of them were shattered by the yellow sand tornado, there were still no less than 100 green sword pearls that bypassed the sand column and rushed towards Su Longxiang. Su Longxiang, who had a wooden expression, took a step forward. A fan-shaped sand wall was erected in front of him. The beads crashed into the wall one after another. There was both the brilliance of mutual destruction and the helplessness of hitting a rock with eggs. The green sword energy was flowing chaotically, and the yellow sand was also surging endlessly. When the green robe was about to be destroyed by the pearls, Huang Qing's left hand pressed on the sword, and he floated silently. Huang Qing casually took the sword from his waist and hit Su Longxiang's chest with the sword hilt. The calm disturbance, which was 3 inches out of the sheath, was knocked back into the scabbard after one hit. Su Longxiang was not sent flying. His feet were still rooted to the ground, but his body slid back several feet. The young man bent slightly, forcibly stopping the momentum of his retreat, and instantly began to sprint, smashing his fists toward the green-robed swordsman. With a flick of his wrist, Huang Qing held his sword horizontally in front of him. His left elbow pressed against the scabbard, forcefully resisting Su Longxiang's fists. The 6th most famous sword in the world, Calm Disturbance, let out an ear-piercing roar in the scabbard, and the scabbard trembled violently. Su Longxiang maintained his posture of striking the sword with his fists and continued to run forward, while Huang Qing was pushed back several dozen feet. Huang Qing, whose feet were a foot off the ground, tapped the ground lightly with his thumb. With a smile on his face, he calmly pulled his sword out of its sheath by an inch. Li Gu folded. Su Longxiang was too lazy to care about what kind of sword move, sword intent, and sword momentum this time, and smashed his fists again. 2-inch sword, stack 2. 3 inches was 3 stacks. Su Longxiang punched the scabbard again and again. Although Huang Qing, who was hovering in the air, never abandoned his sword, he was unable to stop Su Longxiang's charge. However, as the number of punches from Li Gu increased, the distance Huang Qing retreated after each punch from the youth decreased. After Su Longxiang's 8th punch and Li Ji's 8 stacks, Huang Qing finally stood still, with the demeanor of a grandmaster who would not move even if Mount Tai collapsed in front of him. Huang Qing, whose sleeves were fluttering, looked at the youth in front of him. He did not speak, but there was undisguised surprise and admiration in his eyes. There was only a trace of disappointment after the dust had settled. His final fist contained the legendary strength of 8 dragons and 8 elephants, so he was naturally a rarely seen genius of the martial Dao. However, he, Huang Qing, still possessed the 9 folds of Li Gu and even the 10-layered mountains that he evolved from. If this youth who was renowned throughout northern Mang's court stopped here, then he, Huang Qing, didn't dare say that he could defeat his opponent without even drawing his sword. At the very least, he would be in an invincible position. The reason why Huang Qing chose to use Li Gu to fight against Su Longxiang was that he did not have the thought of comparing the youth with Murong Baoding. The latter was a stone Buddha who had been famous for a long time. Huang Qing had once compared notes with the high-ranking imperial relative a few years ago. They did not fight to the death and did not overdo it. When Huang Qing was young, he was determined to use his sword to break the Vajra meditation of the white-robed monk of the 2 Zen temples and complete the feat that Tuoba Bodhisattva could not. Murong Baoding, who was known to be invincible, was undoubtedly the best test stone for his sword. It was said that the youth in front of him, who had cracked Murong Baoding's golden body in Qingsong City in Liuzhou, was even more so. The expressionless Su Longxiang threw out another punch in a seemingly lukewarm manner. The previous 8 punches were all done step by step, with the strength of the dragon and elephant progressing layer by layer. Huang Qing's Li Gu was nothing more than following the prescribed order, layer by layer. Huang Qing, who originally wanted to use Li Gu, felt his heart skip a beat. He resolutely abandoned Li Ji's 9-layered sword and shouted softly, jumping directly to the 10-layered mountain. Huang Qing, who was surrounded by 6 or 7 green rainbows, not only did not use the 10-layered mountain to block the impact of the 9th punch, but the green rainbows also exploded in the blink of an eye. The calm storm was smashed into an astonishing arc by the 2 punches. Huang Qing retreated again and again until he was 80 feet away before he could stop the decline. The scabbard of the calm storm was finally straightened with great difficulty. Huang Qing was neither angry nor fearful. Instead, he was amazed and gratified. He changed the sword stance from raising his arm horizontally to raising his sword vertically. In the blink of an eye, he took the opportunity to remove the huge remaining force from the sword. Huang Qing's thumb caressed the sword hilt. The scene of the sword energy pouring out into green rainbows was gone. However, the more it was like this, the more oppressive it felt like a storm was coming. Li Chungang had passed away. Fortunately, there was still the peach blossom sword deity. Before Dong Tai, who went to the sea to visit immortals, returned to the land, he lifted the sea with his sword and flooded the Guanyin sect. Huang Qing had only gone to Liang River Lake once in his life, but he had stopped at northern Liang. He had met the young chief of Wudong Mountain, Li Yufu, once, and quickly returned to northern Mang. During this period of time, it could not be said that they were at each other's throats, nor were they at daggers drawn. Instead, he took the opportunity to admire the spectacular scenery of the 81 peaks. He also watched the peaceful scene of thousands of people practicing their fists in front of the Wudong main palace at Big Lotus Peak in the morning and evening. In the end, Huang Qing did not continue his long journey to the hinterland of the Central Plains. He did not challenge the white-robed monk Li Dongxin, nor did he meet Deng Teia, the new champion of the world sword art. However, he left in high spirits and returned in high spirits. In addition, he occasionally learned something from his chat with Li Yufu, which was of great benefit to his martial arts cultivation. In terms of the word Dao, Huang Qing admitted that there was no clear winner in his short and amiable conversation with Li Yufu. However, in terms of the word skill, he had a vivid understanding. Su Longxiang did not pursue him. Huang Qing slightly raised the ancient sword in his hand and laughed softly. I am from chess and sword music school. My sword energy is close to Huang Qing's, and my sword is calm. When I was young, I entered the sword art through the way of chess and returned to the way of chess at the age of 30. I thought that returning to the way of sword art in my lifetime would be the end of my martial arts life. Unexpectedly, I found a new way by accident and reached the third realm of the 3 realms of chess player observation in my sect. With this, I created a new sword. I wanted to use this sword to compete with Dong Tai. The young man looked puzzled and whispered, "Just fight. Why are you so meddlesome?" Huang Qing smiled and explained patiently, "You said it was one sword, but it may be 100, 1,000, or even 10,000. To be precise, it should be a game of swords." Su Longxiang did not talk nonsense at all. He directly stepped forward and began to sprint in a straight line toward the chattering middle-aged swordsman. Huang Qing, who was like a scholar meeting a soldier, laughed it off. Then, he looked serious and closed his eyes to absorb the noble qi of heaven and earth. Waves of noble qi filled the space between heaven and earth. It vaguely formed a chessboard, with the famous rivers in the world as the winding chess lines and the huge mountains as the huge chess pieces. It formed a small kiliacosm. If the strength that Huang Qing had shown so far was that his swordsmanship was only at the mysterious level and his will was not at the celestial level, but his mind at the moment reached the level of an immortal on earth. It was no wonder that Huang Qing returned to Beiliang happily after a trip to Beimang. Huang Qing let go of the calm disturbance in his hand, and the ancient sword quickly floated in front of him. The sword was halfway out. Huang Qing's right hand made the shape of lifting and placing chess pieces, and said softly, "Mount Wudong." Top was one of the terms of Go. It was just right to restrain Su Longxiang's seemingly dignified but slightly clumsy chess style. A sword aura was born. Su Longxiang's shoulder crashed into the ethereal aura of the Mount Wudong in front of him. Huang Qing continued to lift and place chess pieces. The change of the first 2 pieces was very small. That was why it was called Little Sharp. But the sword aura was vigorous and solid. As the saying goes, there is no evil hand in a small point. Huang Qing's chess moves, or sword moves, were also upright. It was just a normal game of chess. Of course, it was one piece after another. But this game of chess created by Huang Qing was like flying pieces, not following the rules at all. After the small point, it was the tight chi. After the tight chi, it was the elephant step. Then, it was the combination of the seal and suppression. There was also the continuous power of the 1,000-treasure pavilion. Huang Qing's elegant face glowed with a kind of solemn and dignified brilliance. All the yellow sand that could be blown by the breeze was strangely still at this moment. Only the majestic sword aura was wantonly rampaging. I have an abundant sword aura that is unparalleled in the world. There will be a sword to tell the world. I have been depressed for 40 years. Today I have to speak my mind. Chapter 1303. The sword chi was like a mountain or an abyss. It was like a river or a river. It was like a fish or a dragon. Within 2 miles of the youth, the sword chi rose and fell one after another. No matter how recklessly Su Longxiang charged, it was difficult for him to get close to Huang Qing and the half-unsheathed calm disturbance. Instead, from time to time, he was hit by the majestic sword chi and staggered back. Before he could stand still, he was hit by the continuous following moves. One side was like a trapped beast fighting, while the other side was motionless. How could a chess piece compete with a chess player outside the game? It was obvious who was better and who was worse. What was more frightening was that Huang Qing's new sword did not weaken after a spurt of energy. On the contrary, the moves became more and more smooth, and the artistic conception of the sword gradually entered a better state. The more Su Longxiang struggled fiercely with his powerful body, the more meticulous and seamless Huang Qing's moves became. It seemed that the sword chi, who was determined to correct the name of Beimang's sword art, was using Su Longxiang as a whetstone. The more indestructible the whetstone was, the sharper the sword edge would be under the sharpening of the two. No matter how shallow and narrow-minded a layman was, he knew that when the half-sword was completely unsheathed, Its power would be able to destroy even the bodhisattva of the human world with an indestructible golden body. The young man on the chessboard was hit on the shoulder by a sword chi that was as thick as an arm. His thin and weak body tumbled a few times in the air. After his feet landed on the ground, he still slid 7 or 8 feet away, leaving 2 marks on the sand. However, the yellow sand and dust were suppressed by the sword chi, and it only floated up for an inch before it was suppressed again. One could see the general situation from a small clue. Even if Su Longxiang did not move or trigger Huang Qing's sword chi to launch a counterattack, as long as he was on the chessboard, he was constantly fighting against the sword intent that encompassed 3 miles of area. But even so, Su Longxiang ran tirelessly again and again without showing the slightest sign of fatigue. The so-called infinite strength of the world was extremely suitable for the youth. Su Longxiang raised his head and looked at the green-robed swordsman in the distance. His eyes shone with a faint golden light. He rushed forward again, but this time he did not run in a straight line. The young man's figure left behind a long series of frozen afterimages on the sand. His running path could be vaguely seen. The short distance was messy and disorderly, but if stretched out, it was a half-moon arc. Without exception, those afterimages were all destroyed and dissipated under the crushing pressure of the sword chi. When the last afterimage, which was only 10 feet away from Huang Qing, disappeared, the swordsman who was closest to the sword chi raised his arm and put 2 fingers together, making the gesture of twisting a piece. He paused 3 times in the process. With each pause, the sword chi in front of Huang Qing became denser and denser. After 3 consecutive moves, the 2 of them were in high spirits and showed their sharpness. The chessboard that Huang Qing had set up suddenly became thicker and stronger, as if 3 huge chess pieces had been added to the chessboard. Su Longxiang ran 3 times, each time louder than the last. The last time he knocked away the sword chi, his figure, which had been like a hot knife through butter, showed a trace of stagnation for the first time. Huang Qing smiled slightly and turned his wrist, changing the pressure into a hook. A streak of sword chi broke out of the ground, slanted up and hit a spot in the air. It was like waiting for a rabbit to come out of a tree stump, knocking away Su Longxiang, who had appeared in a flash. There was a saying in Elephant that the earth and earth carried all things. Then Huang Qing's sword was drawn from the earth, seeking the earth in one go. Su Longxiang, who had been knocked into the air, did not have time to react before the sword chi pulled out of the ground smashed into his body. The sword chi was as sharp as an earth dragon or a yellow flood dragon. Even if Su Longxiang was knocked back to the ground, it did not stop. The youth stuck his hands into the ground and his feet against the sand, trying to reduce the distance he retreated. However, the sword chi was so powerful that the youth's body kept exploding with clouds of yellow fog. When a streak of sword chi hit his left shoulder, Su Longxiang's shoulder obviously dropped down, his chest almost touching the ground. When he slapped his left hand and raised his shoulder, he barely blocked the sword chi. The second streak, the third streak, the fourth streak, countless sword chi that grew out of the ground and wrapped in yellow sand came down again. Inch by inch, the youth's body kept sinking down. His 5 fingers formed a hook and supported himself on the ground. The Dechu dynasty once had an overlord who could carry the cauldron. Even if you, Su Longxiang, had great strength, could you bear the weight of heaven and earth? Huang Qing really wanted to see it for himself. Since the original intention of using Su Longxiang to sharpen this new sword had been fulfilled, Huang Qing wanted to use this gifted youth to weigh the weight of the white-robed monk, so as to pave the way for a future battle. Qi was born when one's thoughts moved, and a square inch expanded the heaven and earth. This was Huang Qing's unique way of swordsmanship, which was different from Li Chungang, who was conceited about everything in the world and the sword, and also different from Dong Tai, who reached the extreme of swordsmanship. Only half of the calm disturbance sword was used, but it already had such spirit. It was very likely that Huang Qing had already touched the threshold of the land sword Immortal. Qi Xuanzhen of Mount Longhu once joked that Xianxia was just a bowing slave, celestial phenomenon was just lowering their heads and begging, only land immortals were considered sitting cross-legged. It meant that for celestials, comprehending Xianxia was just a bowing slave. Ascending to the celestial phenomenon realm was just a fluke and begging for a bit of heaven's secret. Only by becoming a land immortal could one be considered not bowing or lowering their heads. However, it was only sitting cross-legged between heaven and earth, which was still a bit shorter than the heavenly way. It was said that there was once an unknown master who went to the demon-slaying platform to ask Qi Xuanzhen, using his spear to attack his shield. He asked Qi Xuanzhen how he should deal with himself. It was said that great immortal Qi only smiled and replied, "Please allow me, who is sitting cross-legged, to stretch out my leg." He was indeed the reincarnation of Ancestor Lu, who had once passed the heavenly gate but did not enter. At the same time, Qi Xuanzhen also said a strange prophecy that was shrouded in clouds and mist. Land immortals have differences in life and death, but there is no difference in superiority. No matter whether Huang Qing was standing or sitting, as long as he reached the sword immortal realm where he could use the power of heaven and earth, plus he was not in the three sects, he would have the qualification to be called invincible. Chapter 1304. Huang Qing opened his eyes and looked at the young man who was almost lying on the ground. There was some pity in his eyes. He felt sorry for the young man's talent, but there was also some obscure self-mockery. The Taiping order once said that where a poisonous snake appeared, there must be herbs. This was the natural law of all things in the world. The more a carp turned into a dragon, the more difficult it was to escape. 100 years ago, Lu Songtao was invincible in the world and sealed the mountain for a nameless wandering Taoist. Li Chuangong's swordsmanship was known to be on par with heaven. He opened the gate of heaven whenever he wanted, but he was restrained by Wang Xianxia. In the end, Wang Xianxia died in the hands of Su Fengyan. Huang Qing calmed his mind and collected his thoughts. In front of him, Su Longxiang had already been blasted into the huge pit by countless sword qis. In his field of vision, with the young man as the center, numerous yellow Jiao dragon sword qis rose from the ground like blooming flower buds. They continuously smashed onto the young man's back, not giving him a chance to catch his breath. After all, it was reasonable that the strength of the dragon and elephant could not defeat the grand atmosphere of heaven and earth. Although Huang Qing was a little regretful that the young man did not make him use all his strength, it was not easy for him to hold on for so long in a game of swordsmanship. Huang Qing did not want to kill Su Longxiang in this way. It was not that he was afraid of being hated by the young king of Bailiang in the future, but that Huang Qing was able to reach the great grandmaster realm of swordsmanship today, and he had a matching breadth of mind. Huang Qing reached out and pressed down on the calm storm, then suddenly pushed it back into the scabbard. Place the heaven's origin. At the same time, a terrifying sword qi as thick as the roots of a mountain fell from the sky. The sword qi exploded into the ground, just like a famous sword returning to its scabbard. The sword qi was so rich that it was exaggerated to the point of flowing water. It crazily overflowed from the big pit and flowed rapidly outside the big pit, soaking the yellow sand. Huang Qing sighed slightly in his heart and turned to return to Gusai state. The calm storm in his hand trembled slightly, and the amplitude was increasing. Huang Qing frowned and looked at the big pit again. He could not detect a trace of vitality, but because of this, the laughter squeezed out from the throat like a beast was particularly terrifying. A thin figure in ragged clothes walked out along the slope of the pit. He was bent and his hands were hanging low. When he raised his head, Huang Qing was a pair of golden eyes. There was not the slightest hint of emotion in those eyes. There was neither sadness nor joy, neither worry nor joy. In the blink of an eye, Huang Qing controlled the sword qi to erect 6 tall walls behind him. The youth, who had lost his human aura, instantly appeared behind Huang Qing. He then began to run, smashing through the 6 walls in one breath. His running speed did not decrease but instead increased. When he was 2 zhang away from Huang Qing, the youth leaped high into the air and pounced at Huang Qing. Huang Qing's hand that was holding the sword slid down and grasped the end of Calm Disturbance's scabbard. After raising his arm, the hilt of the sword accurately hit the young man's throat. Huang Qing said in a low voice, "Dismissed." A bright sword light bloomed in front of the young man's chest. But what surprised Huang Qing was that after the collision, the young man tilted his head back and then hit forward at a faster speed. Not only did he break the sword Qi, but he also almost lost his sword. Huang Qing took a few steps back. During this time, his 5 fingers loosened briefly. When the hilt of the calm storm was knocked back to his palm, he held it again. Fortunately, he did not fail miserably. Otherwise, the sword Qi would have been knocked out of his hand by the young man's throat. But Huang Qing's palm was also bleeding. Huang Qing's wrist shook. The sword was only an inch out when the young man landed and twisted his body. He held the hilt with one hand and, gently, pushed his chest with the other. Not only was the calm storm pushed back into the scabbard, but Huang Qing was also pushed more than 100 feet away by the young man. Huang Qing, who was flying backwards, stepped on the air a few times like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water, creating a long string of mysterious ripples that looked like water ripples. When those ripples gradually expanded and came into contact with each other, sword Qi swayed like lotuses from the water. These 20 or so green lotuses were as tall as an adult in the blink of an eye, blocking the path of the young man. The young man with golden eyes stared at Huang Qing. In the process of sprinting, he grinned but did not speak. His hands casually tore apart the green lotuses that were in his way. Huang Qing took half a step forward, and the back of his shoe was completely covered by the yellow sand. Then he drew an arc on the ground and took half a step back. The yellow sand behind him was pulled by this half step, and he actually pulled out a crescent-shaped sand dragon that was more than 100 feet long. Huang Qing's move was not the sword out of the scabbard, but the scabbard leaving the sword. It was aimed at the young man's heart. Since ancient times, swords had always been shorter and shorter. The Qin sword was more than 22 inches long, while the Dafeng sword was only 19 inches and 6 fun. Later on, the 9 kingdoms' private sword furnaces aside, the imperial court swords all had different lengths, but they did not exceed the Dafeng sword. However, the calm storm, which was one of the most famous swords in the world, was a new weapon that had been forged for less than 20 years. It was as long as the ancient sword of the Qin dynasty, 21 inches and 3 fun. It was to seek the profound meaning of long sword to reach far. This was probably the expectation of the person who gave the sword to Huang Qing. After Huang Qing unsheathed the scabbard instead of the sword, he silently recited, 16 views. The scabbard was 16 inches away from the sword tip. Every inch out there was a view. One view, one form. 16 wonderful visions appeared in the 16 inches in the air. First, there was an illusory little man in a green robe sitting on the sword tip in Huang Qing's hand. He was facing the west. There was a rising sun, shaped like a hanging drum. When the red sun was seen, it opened and closed its eyes. After the sun view, there was a water view. There was ice-like colored glaze, shining brightly. Next, there was the Vajra 7 Treasures golden pagoda, shining brightly. There were constantly precious trees, precious ponds, and precious lotuses growing. There was the endless music of the heavens, and the fairies scattered flowers. Most of Huang Qing's sword. One sword gave birth to Buddha. Su Longxiang's heart was struck by this sword, or rather, the scabbard. His body maintained a charging posture, but he suddenly stopped. Huang Qing slowly moved forward and pushed the sword back into the scabbard. Every inch the sword returned to the scabbard, there was a form that dissipated, and the young man took a step back. Huang Qing looked at the young man 16 steps away and sighed softly, I only know that ghosts and gods can protect things, but I don't know that dragons and elephants will turn into ashes. Chapter 1305. To the north of Qingcang City in Liuzhou, Beimang's vanguard had arrived at the ancient Dong Beach. This place was originally one of a series of passes outside the Great Wall built by the Dafeng dynasty when the army was at its peak. It was used to store military supplies and food, and was used to suppress Rongdi when they went out of the pass. However, it had long become a ruined site for traveling scholars to write poems and reminisce about the past. The low city walls that were built with quicksand, loose stones and red willow reeds in the early years were still faintly visible. The higher trenches on both sides of the city walls had long been shaved off by the sandstorm year after year. Merchants traveling between Beiyang and the western regions could still occasionally pick up some broken arrowheads, broken knives, copper coins and other antiques. Therefore, the ancient Dong Beach was called General Lu Gui's commander's tent was stationed on the north bank of a small lake in the ancient Dong Beach. Around the commander's tent, in addition to many skilled guards in the army, there were also more than 10 well-known Beimeng Jianghu people. In fact, it was not only border commander Lu Gui who had this privilege. Any general at the border would have such a small group of heroes around him, in case of any accident. The war was imminent. If a Beiliang martial arts grandmaster came to take the head of a general in the midst of tens of thousands of soldiers, it would not only make the Liang imperial court laugh at him, but also hurt the morale of the Beimeng army. However, Lu Gui was obviously a very special one among the powerful generals of the southern dynasties. Otherwise, he would not have been praised as half of Su Shao by the Empress of Beimeng. Therefore, in addition to a large number of personal guards and retainers in the commander's tent, there were also many assassins. In addition, there was a group of more hidden hermits. Everyone had an unworldly aura and lived in seclusion. These strange people with withered faces were Qi Watchers. Most of them were from the remnants of the spring and autumn period. In Beimeng, they were always superior to the direct descendants of the powerful families. The former abbot of Aquarius State was convicted of killing 2 Qi Watchers by mistake and was exiled to an extremely cold place thousands of miles away. After Great General Lu Gui led the army to Gudong Beach, there was nothing unusual about him. He ate and slept as usual. Various military orders were passed out of the commander's tent in an orderly manner. He even personally rode to the front line to check on the situation. This made the Qi Watchers and expert retainers extremely nervous. They were afraid that the young and naturally aggressive king of Beiliang would suddenly attack the army camp in a rage. No matter how valuable their Qi Watchers' lives were, they could not be compared to Great General Lu Gui. Who did not know that Lu Gui was one of the best candidates for the commander of the Central Plains campaign in the eyes of the Empress? His position was even far ahead of Great General Yang Yuanzhan and the other abbot of the southern dynasties. At this time, Lu Gui was squatting alone by the lake. News of the unusual movements of the dragon elephant cavalry had long reached the commander's tent. A few of his confidants had suggested that they use this opportunity to lead the army down south and flatten Qingsong City, which did not have enough military strength. Lu Gui did not agree. Thinking of the bloodthirsty light that he was all too familiar with in the eyes of those young people, Lu Gui could not help but smile. It was good to be young. They did not even care about life and death. However, it was an old man like him, who could lie down and enjoy a comfortable life, who cherished his life more and more. However, Lu Gui, who had not yet reached the end of his life, cherished his life, but he was not afraid of losing or dying. However, he did not care about Liuzhou, much less a small Qingsong city that did not affect the overall situation. Previously, Fatty Dong had been hiding and making a series of gaudy movements on the border that even his own people could not deceive. Now, he had finally revealed some of his fangs. Even if he had been sent to Liuzhou and was destined to do some shady business that added icing on the cake, Lu Gui was not angry. After all, from the beginning, Lu Gui had his eyes set on a piece of fat meat that was even more tempting than the barren Beiliang. The Central Plains. Lu Gui muttered to himself, "When I was young, I read a line in a book. Riches and honor that do not return to one's hometown is like walking at night. The older I get, the deeper my feelings become." Lu Gui suddenly thought of something and laughed self-mockingly. Back then, when the emperor said that he was half Su Shao, it really had both advantages and disadvantages. The advantages were naturally that his reputation in the Southern Dynasty army had risen. As for the disadvantages, they were now beginning to show. He heard that the 30,000 Dragon Elephant cavalry did not even need their commander to say anything. They all spontaneously wanted to chop off their own heads and use them as urinals. Lu Gui subconsciously touched his neck. A few days ago, his old friend had sent him a letter. In the letter, he had ridiculed Yang Yuanzhan for being far less valuable than Great General Lu's head. Lu Gui heard a series of urgent shouts behind him. He stood up and turned around to see 3 people jogging over. One of them was the new commander of the Black Fox Shelter, the other was a master from the chess and sword music school, and the leader of the Qi Watchers under his command. The last one had a panicked expression. He quickly walked over and whispered, "Great General, We saw a chi coming from the east. Its target is the commander's tent. If there are no big surprises, it should be the king of Bailiang himself. At the latest, it will take 3 incense sticks to burn. Lu Gui was stunned. He knew very well that Dong Zhuo was about to make a big move in the northern regions of Yu and Liang. He smiled and asked, "Has the king of Bailiang gone mad?" Lin Fu said helplessly, "My dear great general, look at the situation. Who cares if Su Fengnian's brain is flooded with water? Let's quickly set up a defensive line. This kind of top-notch martial arts grandmaster can break through a formation by himself. If he is determined to make a move on you, great general, you really can't underestimate him." Lu Gui's expression did not change. However, he was not arrogant enough to wait for the world's most powerful person to come to him. He said calmly, "Lin Fu, pass down the order. The Central Army will turn east. Then, let Huyan Kachin and Yelu Zongtang each lead 500 fast and light cavalry troops to the left and right flanks. You will lead another 180 Black Fox shelters and act according to the situation. As for the palace's private army, let them arrange themselves. They are more experienced in dealing with Jianghu masters." Lin Fu whispered, "Do we need to place 200 heavy cavalry troops at the front of the battle formation?" Chapter 1306. Lu Gui glared at him and said, "Let's not talk about whether the 200 heavy cavalry can stop the king of Bailiang. Even if they can, how many of them will be left? Even if you don't feel sorry for them, I do." Lin Fu chuckled and did not dare to take matters into his own hands. He quickly turned and ran off to deploy the troops. Lu Gui walked side by side with the Qi refinement warrior in white and the master from the chess and sword music school. The Qi refinement warrior seemed to have been influenced by the general's calmness in the face of danger. He was no longer as anxious as before. He said softly, "General, please rest assured. The 600 well-trained men that His Majesty has bestowed upon him are not very useful if they are used to break through the enemy's lines. However, they are very effective against these lone warriors. Although the king of Bailiang is indeed very powerful, I believe that he is not so powerful that—" Lu Gui smiled and continued the conversation. "Killing people as if they are taking something out of their pocket, right?" The Qi refinement warrior looked a little embarrassed. Lu Gui said calmly, "Although I don't know the depth of that Su Fengnian, I feel that if he really wants to die together with me, it is not difficult for him to kill me, Lu Gui. The difficulty lies in how he can escape unscathed. The reason why I say that he is crazy is not because the Su Fengnian knows that he cannot do it, but because he feels that it is not worth it for him to exchange the king of Bailiang's life for my life, Lu Gui's." Lu Gui smiled and said, "I am very assured. All of you should be even more assured. Our Taiping commandery is always meticulous. We may have a backup plan in the dark." The swordsman from the chess and sword music school smiled knowingly. About half an hour later, an eye-opening army appeared in front of Lu Gui's army. There were less than 600 of them. However, each of them, who were known as the material officers in the Beimang army, was unusually burly and muscular. Everyone had the back of a tiger, the waist of a bear, and the arms of an ape. Bailiang had many crossbows, while Beimang had many strong bows. This was a fact that everyone knew. However, at this moment, Lu Gui's army was lined up in a ballista formation. What was even more frightening was that there wasn't a single light crossbow in this battle formation. Even the waist crossbows were in the minority. Most of them were large ballistae and cloud-piercing crossbow carts that could be used to attack and defend cities. That cloud-piercing crossbow chariot required 12 resource officers to operate and stored 50 crossbow bolts. Each crossbow bolt was 3 feet long, no different from a sword or saber. Moreover, the tip of the arrow was coated with a green poison. Back then, when Northern Mang's Empress Murong solicited the forces of the pugilistic world, it wasn't something that could be accomplished just by moving her lips. It was precisely this item that had established a miraculous merit and ruthlessly crushed the sects and gangs that refused to be controlled one after another. Within 200 steps, when an arrow was shot out, it was said to be equivalent to the full blow of a second-level Supreme Power Master. If this description wasn't enough to describe the fearsomeness of the ballista and the cloud-piercing ballista, then there was an even more shocking description. Within 100 steps, an arrow was equivalent to a flying sword. These crossbows were built and maintained at the cost of abandoning their original purpose. In exchange, the empress had said, "If the people of Jianghu are not willing to obediently jump around in Jianghu, then I'll skewer you into candied gourds." On the battlefield, if one was really targeted to death by such a large number of crossbows, they would not hesitate to accidentally injure their own soldiers. How could a valiant person who could break through enemy lines fight hundreds of battles and live a long life? Lu Gui was heavily guarded at the back of the army. He didn't deliberately put on his shining armor, nor did he set up an eye-catching flag. He looked straight ahead, squinted his eyes, and didn't say a word. A subordinate general beside the general said worriedly, "In fact, the decisive factor is the 3 waves of arrows between 250 steps. If the last wave of arrows, which is as powerful as a flying sword, can't do anything, and that person breaks into the army, it's most likely too late to change the direction of the ballista." Lu Gui pointed at the ballista formation in front of him that was constantly changing under the instructions of the Qi cultivators. He shook his head and smiled. "Then you've underestimated these Qi cultivators and material officers' ballista. If you look carefully at the width and thickness of the ballista formation, you'll know that the direction of attack of the arrows is not one line or a few lines horizontally. Instead, they're determined to shoot a huge fan-shaped rain of arrows vertically. Even if that person doesn't break the formation in a straight line, these ballista can also respond under the command of the Qi cultivators. The power of the ballista itself is indeed terrifying, but what's more terrifying are these Qi cultivators and material officers who came prepared from the beginning." The general lamented, "It's no wonder that our Beimang's Jianghu is not as lively as Liang's." Lu Gui sneered, "What's the use of being so lively in the Jianghu? A bunch of boorish men who only know how to use martial arts to break the rules. They don't care about the country at all. I dare say that in the future, when our dynasty steps into the hinterland of the Central Plains, there will be plenty of Liang's Jianghu experts who will help us kill people. They might even kill people with more heart and soul than our Beimang's army." Lu Gui suddenly stopped talking. A dazzling purple spot appeared in the farthest distance of the old man's vision. The general beside him gasped and said in a trembling voice, "It's really coming." Lu Gui subconsciously raised his arm to give the order. After he put down his arm, his expression was complicated for a moment. He muttered to himself, "He's indeed Su Zhao's son." The purple aura came from the east without stopping. There was a loud bang in the ballista formation. The ballista arrows were shot and pierced through the air. Almost at the same time, a second wave of ballista arrows rained down toward the purple aura in the sky. In an instant, with the ballista formation as the fulcrum, hundreds of ballista arrows that looked like the bones of a fan were shot out. Half of them were no different from the sword of an immortal. But after the blink of an eye, the purple aura swept through the sky without any pause. It continued to streak through the sky and disappeared in a flash. It actually disappeared above Lu Gui's army just like that. Lu Gui, whose back was facing the army, took a small step forward at some point. His face was gloomy. He casually pushed aside the swordsman's corpse in front of him and looked to the west. A ballista arrow pierced through the corpse's chest and nailed into the ground beside Lu Gui's feet. Even the tail of the arrow could not be seen. Lu Gui ignored the panicked shouts of the guards around him and said indifferently with a fake smile, "It's impolite not to reciprocate.